Chapter 196. The girl called Xiaozhu watched as Li Yi took away the rest of the osmanthus cake along with her handkerchief. His figure quickly disappeared at the door, and the expression on her pretty face was somewhat stunned. The story was only told halfway, and it stopped at the most critical moment. Not being able to hear the rest of the story made people's hearts itch uncomfortably. This young master, he didn't keep his word. He clearly said that after eating her osmanthus cake, he would tell a good story. The girl clenched her fists, lightly bit her lower lip, and murmured in a low voice. Seeing the scholar take the reward and simply turn around to leave, the men who were attracted by the story of the painted skin were also dumbfounded. What the hell is this? Just as they were tempted by the storyteller ran away irresponsibly. Did he even consider the feelings of the audience? Why was this young scholar even more abominable than the old storyteller on the stage? Yuzhu, who was that person? The old storyteller came down from the stage and walked to the girl's side. He looked in the direction of the door and asked. Although the story was not finished, there was no one here to listen to him. Originally, he wanted to come over and ask clearly, but he didn't expect that the disruptive scholar would run away so quickly. Before the girl had time to reply, the man who was frightened by her just now spoke first. Old man, don't tell the story you just told. Do you know how to tell the painted skin? Hurry up and tell us a part, and we will reward you. The man took out a copper coin from his bosom and slapped it on the table. He stared closely at the old man and said, Yes, that scholar just now was too unruly. He ran away halfway through his story, and it made people's hearts itch. Hurry up and continue from where he just left off. The old man's face revealed a stunned expression. He simply didn't understand what these people were saying. What did they want me to tell? What skin? How would he know what skin it was? Originally, he wanted to come here to listen to the music and watch the dance. But he didn't come at a good time. He met a chattering old man, and his only gain was these osmanthus cakes. The osmanthus cake made by rewatching was really delicious. The next time he met her, he would ask her how to make it, and teach Xiaohuan when he went back. He could make more to take with him. In this era, there was no variety of snacks. If he was hungry in the county government, he could eat a few pieces to fill his stomach. Since he had nothing to do, he decided to wander around. This tile-roof building could be considered a fairly large entertainment venue in Qing'an Prefecture. It was an extremely wide square with all kinds of tile-roofed houses. Other than the large and small booths used for performances, there were also many merchants. On both sides of the square, a dazzling array of goods were displayed. Li paused for a moment outside a few of the booths. There were singers, actors, people swallowing swords in their mouths, and people breaking rocks with their chests. It was a dazzling sight. It had to be said that the people in the city were more playful than the villagers in the Willow Leaf village. They knew how to find fun for themselves. Although it was still daytime, there were a lot of people gathered here. It was a good place to kill time. Li visited a few more booths one after another. Looking at the sky, he estimated that it was almost time to get off work. After patrolling outside for so long, it was time to go home for dinner. On his way back, he passed by a certain brothel. The eyes of a girl who was standing at the door to receive customers lit up. She hurriedly took a few steps forward and grabbed his arm. Child, come in and play. Her coquettish voice gave Li Yi goosebumps, and he hurriedly flung his arm away from her hand. The brothel here was not as high-end as the Jade Courtyard. There were no prostitutes to accompany you to recite poems and songs, talk about life and ideals. The purpose of men coming here was very simple, which was to satisfy their physiological needs. Li Yi had endured for more than 20 years in his previous life. He had only experienced a few months in this world, so his physiological needs were not so strong. Moreover, in any case, he could not give up his first time here. The heavily made-up brothel girl saw that the handsome young man in front of her didn't seem to have that kind of intention. She wanted to give up, but she was unwilling. It was very difficult to meet such an outstanding customer here. She simply clenched her teeth and said, Young master, come in with me. I won't take your money. Although she was a prostitute and was in the flesh business, she would still be a little annoyed when she had to face those old and ugly patrons every day. If she could have sex with such a young gentleman, she would be willing to pay for it. No charge. Li Yi was shocked because of this sentence. It turned out that what Li Xian said last time was not a lie. He could really go to a brothel without paying for it. However, the situation now was a little different. This girl with shining eyes did not give him such a big discount because of some poems or essays. Most likely it was because he had the potential to be a gigolo. He struggled out of the girl's hand as if he was escaping. The girl seemed to be very disappointed. In the end, she even showed that she wanted to pay for it. After apologizing repeatedly, Li Yi hurriedly left. He secretly sighed in his heart. The young ladies in this world are really passionate and unrestrained. After leaving Hua City, he was not in the mood to stroll anymore. When he returned to the county government, he directly went to the back office to ask Fong to go back with him. Your Excellency, Brother Fong went out to buy something. When Fong was not there, a yamen runner ran over and said, Fong had nothing to do in the county government all day, so he became familiar with these yamen runners. Usually he called him Brother Fong. Forget it. When he comes back, tell him that I am going back first. According to Li Yi's understanding of Fong, after buying something on the street, he did not know how long it would take. He was too lazy to wait for him to come back. He rented a carriage and slowly drove out of the prefecture. At the same time, in the Willow Leaves village, Xiao Huan looked a little anxious. The little rabbit that was given to her by the son-in-law was lost. Why don't we go outside and look for it? Maybe it ran out because it was hungry. Lu Rui looked at her and comforted her. No, I just fed it this morning. Xiao Huan's voice sounded like she was about to cry. She had raised that rabbit for a long time and already had feelings for it. She felt very sad that it was lost for no reason. In the past, even if she let the rabbit out, it only moved around in the yard. Sometimes it would run out, but it would not run very far. After a while, it would run back on its own. But today, she had searched the yard and the surrounding area, but still found nothing. I still can't find it. Maybe it sneaked away. Lu Rui walked in from outside. She had expanded the scope of the search, but still couldn't find the rabbit. Although Xiao Huan was not very willing to believe it, she also knew that this rabbit was originally caught from outside. Maybe it also had its own family. If someone wanted to separate Xiao Huan from Miss and the son-in-law, she must be very sad in her heart. I hope the little rabbit can find its family. The little servant girl sighed and murmured, Child, should I still wait here tomorrow morning? The servant of the carriage sent Li Yi to the foot of the mountain. The mountain road was in front of him, and he asked before leaving. No need. Li Yi waved his hand. Last time when he nailed the horse's shoes, it seemed to be frightened and did not act wildly in front of him again. It obediently stopped jumping around. When he went out tomorrow, he could ride it. The servant drove the carriage back. Li Yi walked alone on the mountain road, thinking that there was still a long way to go back to the stockade village. He had to realize his dream of buying a big house in the city as soon as possible. Willow Leaves Stockade used to be a mountain bandit village. When building the village, it was natural to consider whether it would be easily destroyed by the troops sent by the government. On the way, there were rugged mountain roads. Some places could only allow one person and one horse to pass. It was easy to defend and difficult to attack. As a mountain bandit village, its location was not bad. But as a village, it was extremely difficult to go out, hiding in the deep mountains. It was also reasonable that several generations of villagers were so poor. Haha, County Magistrate Li, why didn't Fong Laosan follow you today? Li walked through a dense forest. Suddenly, a sound came from the forest. He stopped in his tracks and looked up. He saw a person walking out of the forest and looking at him with a smile that was not a smile. Chapter 197. Wooing. Li frowned when he saw the young man walking out of the woods with his hands behind his back and blocking his way home. Although he was not familiar with the person in front of him, he was definitely not a stranger. On the first day when he was caught by Lu Rui, it was this person who broke into the house with his second aunt. It seemed that he had been thinking about Rui for a long time. Li had only met him a few times in the stockade village. Wu Ying's attitude towards him was not friendly. Wu Ying was the nephew of his second aunt. Although his surname was not Lu, He often came to the stockade village and was very familiar with the people of the Liu family. He could be regarded as half a member of the Willow village. Meeting him here was beyond Li Yi's expectation. What he said just now seemed to have a hidden meaning. Li Yi heard a trace of malice from his tone. This malice was no longer just unfriendly. What do you mean? Li Yi looked at him and asked with a frown. You will know what I mean in a moment. Wu Ying showed a cold smile and strode towards him. Seeing that he came with bad intentions, Li Yi's face changed slightly. Rui had warned him a long time ago to be careful of Wu Ying. Wu Ying had been apprenticed to a powerful figure in the martial arts world, and his martial arts skills could not be underestimated. Li Yi knew that even though he had been trained by Rui for a long time, and was no longer a weak scholar, he was still far from being Wu Ying's opponent. He subconsciously drew out the waist knife that he carried with him. Although he knew that he could not beat him with a weapon, it was better than fighting with his bare hands. Wu Ying's lips curled into a cold smile. Li Yi raised his saber and slashed at him. Wu Ying's body swayed slightly, and he easily dodged the attack. In the next moment, his figure disappeared before Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi instinctively felt danger, but before he could react, he felt a sharp pain at the back of his neck, and then he felt everything go black. Shit. The last thing he could think of was that he regretted leaving alone without Fong, Lord County Lieutenant. Pooh! Wu Ying snorted coldly. A look of disdain appeared on his face as he spat on the ground. He bent over and put Li Yi on his shoulder. He picked up the saber that had fallen to the ground, turned around and walked into the dense forest behind him, gradually disappearing on the small path. In the Willow Leaf village, the little maid was sitting in the yard, still sad about the lost rabbit. Unknowingly, the sky had darkened. When she raised her head, she could already see the moon. Xiao Huan looked at the direction of the door and muttered, "Why is son-in-law not back yet?" According to the usual situation, the son-in-law should have reached home more than 2 hours ago, right? Could it be that there was a delay in the yamen? The little servant girl was distracted by this matter. At this time, Lu Rui walked out from the courtyard and asked in puzzlement, "Xiao Huan, is son-in-law not back yet?" "No." The servant girl shook her head, stood up and said, "I'll go ask Uncle Fong." Son-in-law had always been with Uncle Fong. If Uncle Fong did not come back, it should be that son-in-law was busy with something. In the past, he would occasionally sleep in the shop and not come back. Now, the little servant girl would not let her imagination run wild like before. Lu Rui nodded and watched Xiao Huan walk out of the house. She did not think much. Xiao Huan went out for a while and came back with Fong. "What son-in-law is not back yet?" Fong looked at his sister Rui with a face full of puzzlement. The mutton at home was gone. Before he came back today, he went to the butcher's shop to buy some mutton for dinner. He left for at most an hour. When he returned to the yamen, the bailiff told him that son-in-law had already gone back. Fong had to go back to the stockade by himself. After returning, he did not come back to take a look. Just now, the stove at home had been set up, and the charcoal was burning brightly. Fong was about to sharpen his chopsticks to eat the mutton, when Xiao Huan came to ask about son-in-law. When he heard that son-in-law had not returned, Fong put down his chopsticks and hurried over. Could he be at Rui workshop? Lu Rui looked at him and asked. This was also a possibility. If he did not return to the stockade, he would most likely be sleeping at Rui workshop. Fong shook his head and said firmly, "That's impossible. I came back with the girls in the shop. Son-in-law did not go to the shop today." The worker at the cart shop also said that he saw son-in-law go up the mountain with his own eyes. "How about I go to Uncle Han's place? Son-in-law often goes to Uncle Han's house recently." When the young maidservant spoke again, her pretty face was already filled with anxiety. "I'll go." Hearing this, Fong turned and went out of the courtyard. Eldest Miss had asked him to protect son-in-law. Now that there was no news of son-in-law, Fong was also extremely anxious. If something happened to son-in-law, not only would he be ashamed to see eldest miss, but Fong would also feel guilty. Moreover, son-in-law's disappearance this time was completely different from the last time. Last time, when son-in-law disappeared, Fong blamed himself, but it was not that serious. After all, if son-in-law ran away on his own, it was just that he did not keep an eye on him. But this time, Son-in-law's disappearance was definitely not a possibility. Ah, son-in-law. Son-in-law has not been here for a few days. What's wrong? Son-in-law has disappeared. Uncle Han asked in confusion when he saw Fang's anxious face. Hearing this, Fang's body trembled, and the expression on his face became even more anxious. After gritting his teeth, he knocked on the door of another house. What son-in-law? I don't see him. How could son-in-law be here? I don't see him. What happened to son-in-law? After knocking on almost all the doors in the stockade, hearing these people's answers, Fang's face gradually turned pale. At the same time, in a shack in a remote mountain forest, the eyelashes of a young man lying in the corner trembled slightly. His neck hurts. This was his first feeling. In the past, he had only seen it in movies. Those experts only needed to chop the back of a person's head, and the person would immediately faint. This time, he had experienced it for himself. So he could really faint. Apart from the pain in his neck, he also felt a little dizzy. He raised his head and began to look around. This was a semi-enclosed space, probably similar to a shack. It was built with some simple wood. There was nothing in the shack, and the outside was covered with hay. It was extremely simple. At the moment, he was in a corner of the shack. His limbs could move freely, and he was not tied up with a rope. The waist knife was casually thrown beside him. It seemed that Wu Ying was quite confident in him. But thinking about it, through the small confrontation just now, Li Yi understood the difference between the two of them. Although he did not have a clear understanding of how powerful Wu Ying's martial arts were, there was one thing that was unquestionable. Even if he had a knife, he would only be killed in a second. Now was not the time to think about how powerful Wu Ying's martial arts were. Thinking of a way to escape was the most important thing. Usually, the bad guys that he met would at least be reasonable. Encountering this kind of guy who would fight at the slightest disagreement, Li Yi was also very helpless. Other than a little pain in the back of his neck, and some discomfort in his abdomen, the other parts of his body did not feel any discomfort. He tried to stand up from the ground. At this moment, a figure walked in from the outside. You woke up so quickly. Faster than I thought. Wu Ying looked at him coldly and said mockingly, Tell me, what do you want? Li Yi patted the dust off his body and replied indifferently, I thought that Rui chose a trash. I didn't expect that you really have some guts. Wu Ying looked at him and frowned. He still had a mocking tone. He thought that after the scholar woke up, he would definitely cry and beg for his life. He did not expect that he would have such an attitude. He was just a weak scholar. Where did his confidence come from? He did not answer Li Yi's words. He looked at him and said, Do you know, since I was very young, I had already decided to marry Rui. Speaking of this, his eyes suddenly became sinister. That night, if it wasn't for Rui stopping me, I would have really killed you. Li Yi patted the dust off his clothes, tightened his sleeves and said indifferently, And then? Could it be that this was the reason why he kidnapped him? Since he did not hide his true face at all, it seemed that he did not intend to leave him alive. Some people in this world were really king crazy. Of course, now she is no longer worthy of me. Wu Ying's expression was a little disgusted. He looked at Li Yi again and said, Hand over the formula of Rui dew and liquor, and I will spare your life. Li Yi twitched the corner of his mouth. This kind of words could deceive others, but not him. According to the plot of the TV series, whenever a bad guy said such words, he must be thinking of killing immediately after getting the secret. It turns out that it's just for the formula of Rui dew and liquor. You should have said it earlier. Why bother? He waved his hand and said, Rui dew and liquor are actually the same thing. The key is how to purify the alcohol. The equipment for purifying alcohol is a bit complicated. You can't understand it if I explain it like this. How about I wait for you here? You go back and get a pen and paper. I'll draw it for you. Wu Ying sneered and said, Do you think I'm stupid? If I leave, will I still see you when I come back? That's your fault. Li Yi's face showed shame and annoyance, as if he had been greatly insulted. He walked in front of Wu Ying, pointed at his nose and said, A scholar doesn't lie. I said I'll wait for you here, so I'll wait for you here. Buzz! Before his voice died away, a light sound came from his sleeve. A black light spot quickly enlarged in Wu Ying's eyes. Thank you, Uncle Han, Li thought to himself. Chapter 198. It's all my fault. If I hadn't been greedy and went to buy meat, the son-in-law wouldn't have met with an accident. Fong grabbed his hair, his eyes bloodshot as he spoke with extreme self-blame. Now is not the time to talk about this. The most important thing is to find the son-in-law. A man dressed in coarse clothing patted his shoulder and instructed the people beside him. Since the worker from the carriage shop last saw the son-in-law at the foot of the mountain, let's follow the road up the mountain and look. Something might have really happened. Perhaps we'll meet the son-in-law halfway. Brother Su is right, another man hurriedly added. Perhaps the son-in-law suddenly remembered that there was something he had to do when he went up the mountain and returned to the prefectural city. How about this, you guys look along the road first. While the city gates are not closed, I'll go to Rui Square and the county yamen to take a look. If there's news of the son-in-law, I'll come back to inform you immediately. These men were the ones who had worked by Li Yi's side in the beginning. From Fong's anxious expression and words, they could guess what had happened. At this moment, 3 to 5 people discussed for a moment and hurriedly left the stockade village. They followed the mountain road and looked all the way down. Fong's eyes became even more bloodshot. After looking back at a certain courtyard, he rushed down the mountain. Second Miss will definitely find the son-in-law. Night had completely fallen. A figure stood at the doorway and looked down the mountain as she murmured. She didn't hear the second Miss's reply. When she turned her head again, a fine horse rushed out of the courtyard and crossed the threshold. Under the bright moonlight, the figure of the woman on the horse quickly disappeared from her sight. A scholar doesn't lie. I said I'll wait for you here, so I'll wait for you here. Wu Ying watched as the scholar walked in front of him, pointed at his nose, and said such words. A mocking expression appeared on his face. This scholar must have really studied so much that he had become stupid. He was delusional enough to use such words to deceive him. Just as this thought appeared in his mind, a buzzing sound suddenly came to his ears. Then a strong sense of life and death suddenly came. A black speck of light shot out of the scholar's sleeve and rapidly enlarged in his eyes. Wu Ying's expression changed drastically, and he subconsciously reached out to grab it. However, the reason why Li Yi had walked so close to him just now was so that he wouldn't have time to react. The last thing Wu Ying saw was an expanse of blood red. Ah! A shrill voice suddenly came out from the shack. Wu Ying held the arrow in his eye with one of his hands. His facial features were all twisted together, and the expression on his face was hideous and terrifying. The improved sleeve crossbow made by Uncle Han couldn't be fired consecutively, and Li didn't think he could finish off Wu Ying in one go. After hearing the sound of the crossbow, he lifted the waist knife under his feet into his hand and stabbed forward. Puff! It was the sound of a sharp weapon cutting through flesh. Wu Ying held the hidden dart in his eye with one hand and tightly gripped the blade with the other. Blood dripped down. Li Yi's blade was finally blocked by him. You deserve to die. He suddenly raised his hand. Li Yi's hand shook, and the waist knife in his hand flew out. Wu Ying hit his abdomen with a backhand palm. Li Yi only felt like being hit by a fierce beast. He spat out blood from his mouth and hit the wood of the shack. The pain in his abdomen was unbearable, as if his internal organs were displaced. After hitting Li Yi with one palm, Wu Ying had already rushed over again in the next moment. Watch the arrow. Li Yi suddenly raised his sleeve. The previous arrow was still stuck in Wu Ying's eye. Seeing this, his expression changed. His whole body flipped in the air strangely and fell heavily to the side, dodging. He didn't hear the sound of the bowstring. Li Yi's forehead was full of cold sweat. He covered his abdomen, leaned against the shack, and sat up with difficulty. He waved his hand at Wu Ying and said, "Don't be nervous, I'm just kidding you." "You're kidding me." The expression on Wu Ying's face became more ferocious. He picked up the long knife beside him and walked step by step towards Li Yi. "Don't worry, I won't let you die so easily." According to his original plan, after forcing the Rui Du's formula from the scholar's mouth, he would immediately kill him, regardless of whether he was a county officer or not. From then on, he would escape thousands of miles away and let him roam freely between heaven and earth. Not only would he get his revenge, but with the Rui Du's formula, no matter where he went, he would not be short of money. At that time, he could have as many women as he wanted. Why would he still think about Lu Rui? However, he didn't expect that the other party was just a weak scholar who could kill him with one hand. Naturally, he let down his guard. And then he failed miserably. Who would have thought that this scholar could shoot arrows from his sleeve? If he didn't look down on him and checked carefully, he wouldn't have ended up like this. It was too late to say all this now. The sharp pain had caused his consciousness to become a little fuzzy, that I might not be able to stay. No matter how regretful he was at this time, it would be of no use. Once he had forced the formula out of him, he would definitely try thousands of punishments on him to take revenge for this arrow. After taking 2 steps, Wu Ying's legs suddenly went soft and he knelt on the ground. It's finally working. Li Yi wiped the sweat off his forehead and let out a long sigh of relief. At this time, Wu Ying's hand no longer had the strength to hold the knife, and his body fell straight down. Wave after wave of strong tiredness hit his mind. Relying on a tenacious willpower, he spoke with difficulty. I put poison on the arrow. Li Yi slowly moved to his side, picked up the waste knife beside him, and placed it on his neck. Brother Wu, goodbye. Wu Ying held the knife handle and wiped it gently. His remaining eye suddenly opened wide. Don't worry. I will burn the formula of Rui Du for you when I get back. I hope there are no transmigrators in the hell of this world. After saying this, Li Yi seemed to have exhausted all the strength in his body, and his whole body went limp next to Wu Ying. Thanks to Uncle Han's craftsmanship, thanks to the powerful knockout drug used by Dainyu and his wife, and thanks to the formula of the floral water, Wu Ying didn't use the knife at the beginning. There was a tingling sensation on his thigh. When he reached out to touch it, it was sticky. He was afraid that it was stung by a branch just now. There was also a big hole in his clothes. He sat up with his hands, tore off a strip of cloth, and made a simple bandage. Only then did he turn to look at Wu Ying. This guy was simply a psychopath. On the first day after transmigrating, he was taken back to the village. Was this his fault? Just for such a small matter, did he have to risk his life? Damn it, did he still care about the law? Even martial arts masters would die if their necks were slit. A dead martial arts master, even if he didn't care about the law, would not be so terrifying. However, it would be disgusting. One of Wu Ying's eyes was pierced by a sleeve arrow, and it was already soaked in blood. The other eye was wide open, as if it was about to burst out of its socket. His throat was cut, and blood flowed on the ground vomit. As a person of 2 lives, it was the first time that Li Yi saw such a scene. In particular, all of this was done by him. When his life was hanging by a thread just now, he didn't feel anything. But now he couldn't bear it. Li Yi turned his head and retched on the spot. At this time, under the cold moonlight, on the path leading to the shack, a few strong figures were approaching. Chapter 199. Their footsteps were steady and unhurried. From time to time, they would step on the dead branches on the ground and make a crisp sound, startling the birds that were resting in the forest at night. With a flapping sound, they flew deeper into the night. Big Brother were almost there. In the distance, they saw a dark shadow lurking in the forest like a giant beast. The person walking in front stopped and said in a low voice. Another few dozen feet in front of them was the shack that Wu Ying and the others had agreed on. Big Brother, do you think that Brother Wu will be able to succeed? A man with a long face glanced at the shack and whispered. Big Brother, do you think that Brother Wu can succeed? It is said that the person is only a weak scholar. Brother Wu's martial arts are not bad. Even if the 3 of you work together, you might not be his match. I'm afraid this matter is foolproof. The person that the long-faced man called Big Brother was a tall man with several crisscross scars on his face. He said in a deep voice, That's true. With Brother Wu's skills, there shouldn't be any mishaps. I just don't know if he will be able to get the Rui Du formula out of him. I heard that the formula is very valuable. The long-faced man nodded. He 4th brother, why are you worried about this? Those scholars are the most cowardly. Let's first cut off one of his hands and one of his legs. Let's see if he wants his life or the formula. A knife-wielding man next to the long-faced man heard this and curled his lips in disdain. The four of them had killed people for money many times in the past few years. No matter how tough a person was, after a few cuts, they would spill everything that should and shouldn't be said. When the four of them committed the crime, they did not clean up the mess and were targeted by the government. They fled to Qing'an Prefecture and met Wu Ying by chance. After getting to know each other, Wu Ying revealed some things to them. With the cooperation of the four of them, today's matter came about. Let's hurry over. If Brother Wu doesn't hold back and torments the scholar to death, our efforts today will be in vain, the long-faced man urged. He wasn't worried about the scholar. In the past, the four of them had encountered a similar situation. Once, they had interrogated a rich man about the location of his treasury. In the end, they were too heavy-handed. Before they could get the answer, the rich man had already died, causing them to waste their efforts. This Brother Wu had never done such a thing before. It was said that he had a lot of personal grudges with that scholar. If they killed him before they could get the formula out of him, then their dreams of getting rich would be shattered. Fourth bro is right. Let's hurry over. Among the four of them, the thin man who had been silent all this while spoke up and took the lead to walk towards the shack. The other three followed closely behind him. In the shack, Li almost threw up his gallbladder. He no longer looked at Wu Ying's body. His thigh was burning with pain, and the place where Wu Ying's palm hit his abdomen was even more painful. Most of the reason he vomited just now was probably because of that palm. He had heard from Rui that after practicing martial arts and cultivating jinqi, a light palm hit a person's body. On the surface, there would be no wound, but in fact, the internal organs would have been destroyed by the jinqi. Li felt that he was in this state now. That bastard Wu Ying's palm just now was not light. Previously, when he saw Fong and the others send people flying with one punch, he felt that it was quite exciting. After experiencing it himself, there was only unspeakable pain. Just now, he lifted up his clothes to take a look. There was already a bruised palm print there. He didn't know if he had suffered some internal injuries. After resting for a few minutes, his head began to feel dizzy again. At this time, he began to understand why Li Xian always brought so many guards with him when he went out. If he came back with Fong today, he wouldn't be in such a miserable state. He stood up with some difficulty. He didn't look at Wu Ying, who was lying on the ground again, and walked straight outside. Only God knew if Wu Ying had any accomplices. To deal with Wu Ying, he had used all his skills and almost died. Not to mention another person who knew martial arts. It would be difficult for him to deal with an ordinary person now. Brother Wu, we are here. A rough voice came from outside the shack. Li's footsteps stopped. Damn, what did I say came? Li cursed in his heart and held the knife in his hand tightly. Brother Wu. Seeing that there was no sound coming from inside, the long-faced man asked again. Come in. This time, there was a sound coming from inside the shack. Did you catch him? The long-faced man's face showed a trace of joy as he walked into the shack. The moonlight shone through the gap of the shack. He couldn't see the situation inside clearly. The long-faced man could only see a figure squatting there. As for the ground, he could faintly see a person lying on the ground. How is it? Did you get the formula? The long-faced man was most concerned about this question. He strode over. I wasn't careful and killed him. The next words of Brother Wu caused the big man's expression to change. What? What he worried about had really happened. The scar-faced man quickly walked over. Let me see. He directly squatted down beside that Brother Wu and wanted to see the corpse. At this time, there was suddenly an explosive sound coming from behind. Old four, be careful. The long-faced man was lying on the ground. He heard his big brother's familiar voice. When he was about to turn around, a cold long knife was already on his neck. Don't move. The slightly muffled voice suddenly became clear. Brother Wu Yu. The long-faced man was shocked and angry. He slowly turned his head. Just as he was about to question that Brother Wu, his face changed again. You are not Brother Wu. As if he had thought of something, he suddenly looked at the corpse on the ground. With the help of a few rays of moonlight, he saw a small arrow stuck in one eye, and the other eye was wide open. Wu Yingshi was already dead, and his face showed an expression of extreme disbelief. That scholar, the weak scholar that they thought had actually killed Wu Ying. It was precisely because he was extremely confident in Wu Ying's martial arts skill that he was worried that Wu Ying would not be able to capture the person, worried that he would use a heavy hand to kill the scholar. But he had never worried that Wu Ying would fail miserably and fall into the hands of the scholar. Therefore, when he entered the shack, even though he felt that Brother Wu's voice was a little different today, he was only slightly puzzled. He did not think about it in any way. But the scene in front of him proved that his previous worries were all for naught. There was blood on the knife. It was likely that Wu Ying had died under this knife. Looking at the calm scholar, the long-faced man felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. At the entrance of the shack, the three men looked at the scene in the shack with a face full of disbelief. Wu Ying was dead. Old Four had a knife on his neck. Was this the weak scholar that Wu Ying had mentioned? It's very uncomfortable to squat down. Please cooperate and stand up. As the few of them were shocked, the scholar's voice came over. Chapter 200. Gulp. The long-faced man's throat moved, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. The ice-cold long saber was placed on his neck, and with just a little bit of force, a very fine line of blood seeped out. He didn't dare to delay, and slowly stood up. Don't be rash. Let's talk. The long-faced man's voice trembled as he hurriedly said. Wu Ying's neck had clearly been cut by someone. He didn't want to be lying on the ground in the same position as him in a moment's time. After all, he and Wu Ying didn't have much of a friendship. They were only using each other out of mutual benefit. He didn't want to avenge him, and didn't want to die with him. He only hoped that the scholar wouldn't be rash. At the entrance of the shack, the three of them looked at each other and slowly moved inside. The three of you get out. The scholar had already stood up. The long knife was still pressed against the fourth disciple's neck as he looked at the three of them. The three of them had no choice. After a pause in their steps, they slowly retreated. The fourth disciple was still in the scholar's hands. If they acted rashly and angered him, the scholar's hand would shake, and the fourth disciple's head would be gone. They could only follow his wishes and temporarily retreat. The scholar seemed to have suffered serious injuries, and probably wouldn't last much longer. At this moment, the three of them were shocked and depressed. When Wu Ying had first told them about this scholar, his tone had been nonchalant and extremely disdainful. He had taken on everything by himself. As long as the four of them came here at night and forced the formula out of the scholar's mouth, they would immediately form a group and escape from Qing and Fu. If they encountered soldiers, the five of them working together would have a higher chance of escaping. Unexpectedly, they had come according to the agreement, but Wu Ying had kicked the bucket. He would never be able to fulfill the agreement, and had died at the hands of the weak scholar he had spoken of. He had even dragged the fourth disciple down. Thinking of Wu Ying's description of the scholar, the three of them cursed in their hearts at the same time. Mother asterisk cur. Was this really a scholar who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken? After dealing with Wu Ying, he was still able to calmly pretend to be him and hold the knife against the fourth disciple's neck. Who was the fugitive here? At this moment, the fugitive in their hearts was holding a long saber, his face extremely pale. A deep sense of exhaustion entered his mind, and Li bit the tip of his tongue, instantly becoming more clear-headed. For people, including the horse-faced man who was temporarily held hostage by him, there were a total of 4 people on the other side. In a one-on-one fight, he was definitely not a match for any of them. If he hadn't used the cover of the night and pretended to be Wu Ying to deceive this man, he would have fallen into the tiger's mouth right after escaping from the wolf's claws. Why did he always meet such a bastard? What happened to the protagonist's halo? The current situation was actually not optimistic. Although he had used this man to temporarily restrain these people, he still could not escape. He did not have the physical strength to hold the knife against the man's neck while walking back. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt a chill under his feet. He looked down and saw that his left foot was only wearing a sock. He did not know when he had lost one of his shoes, but he did not notice it earlier. He sighed softly. Even though the situation was not optimistic, he still could not give up. He bit the tip of his tongue again to wake himself up a little. Now there was no need to rush to leave. He needed to recover some of his physical strength first, so that he would have the strength to negotiate with these people later. Otherwise, when his body could not take it anymore, he would inevitably have to face another tragedy. Although the formula of the Rui Do was important, it was more important to stay alive. Big brother, is that scholar really going to slit the fourth disciple's neck? Outside the shack, the tall man holding the knife looked at the scar-faced man and asked worriedly, "No, that scholar is a smart person. He would not understand that if he killed the fourth disciple, he would not be able to escape." Before the scar-faced man could speak, the thin man spoke first. "That's right," the scar-faced man said in a deep voice. "If he wants to live, he will not touch the fourth disciple. Although I do not know how he killed Brother Wu, he seems to have suffered quite a serious injury. With the fourth disciple's intelligence, nothing serious will happen to him. We can just wait here. I think it will not be long before he comes out on his own." Before the scar-faced man could finish his words, the expressions of the three changed at the same time, and they looked in the direction from which they came. Under the moonlight, a faintly discernible shadow was rapidly approaching. "Who is it?" The three of them turned at almost the same time. The shadow's speed was extremely fast. In the time of 2 breaths, the three of them saw a fine horse galloping in their direction, and a young woman on the horse. The woman held a small piece of cloth in her hand. She flew down from the horse and looked ahead coldly. In the middle of the night, in the wilderness, there was actually such a woman. The three of them were extremely surprised. "Hee, big brother, second brother. Could it be that the heavens know that we brothers are lonely at night, and have specially sent us a beauty to relieve our boredom?" The man holding the knife was stunned for a moment. Using the moonlight, he saw the woman's face clearly. A lustful smile appeared on his face, and he walked towards the woman. Although he did not know why the woman would appear here, the reason was not important. What was important was the result. The horse found its way here, and did not advance any further. The woman held the piece of cloth she had picked up on the mountain path in her hand. When she looked at the shack in front of her, she paused for a moment. Among the withered branches and withered leaves on the ground, a shoe appeared out of place. Under the moonlight, it looked extremely out of place. The smell of blood, the faint smell in the air made her heart sink. "Where is Li Yi?" She raised her head and looked at the man who was walking towards her and asked coldly, "Li Yi?" When the man holding the knife heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then he remembered that this was the name of the scholar that Brother Wu had mentioned. So this woman had come to find the scholar. What a coincidence. If he could capture her, the scholar would no longer be a threat to the fourth brother. Moreover, this woman looked. When he thought of this, an inexplicable smile appeared on his face. "You're talking about that scholar? He's dead." He looked at the woman and said, "In my opinion, you don't have to look for that scholar. Which one of us brothers isn't thousands of times better than him? He's dead." This sentence kept echoing in the woman's ears. Her body trembled and her face instantly turned pale. In the end, "I'm still too late. Third brother, capture her first. We'll talk about other things later." The calm man said aloud. The third brother had always been a lustful person, and had made many mistakes in the past. This woman's appearance was strange. It was most important to first capture her, and use her to threaten the scholar. "I say, second brother, why are you always so rude? Don't be rude to this beauty. Look at her little face." The man who was called the third brother put down his knife, and a teasing expression appeared on his face. He reached out to touch the woman's pretty face. "He's dead. Why are you still alive?" At this moment, a cold and emotionless voice suddenly rang in his ear. The man was stunned. In the next moment, a white light flashed in front of him. His eyes suddenly widened, and he covered his throat with both hands. He struggled to breathe, but it was all in vain. Blood flowed out from the gaps between his hands, and his body fell straight to the ground with a dull thud. Chapter 201. The sword light was as fast as lightning, and the sword cut the throat. It was only when the man's corpse fell on the ground covered in withered leaves that the scar-faced man and the calm man slowly came to their senses. Under the moonlight, the man whose throat was no longer bleeding had his eyes wide open. Even in death, he could not understand why the woman, who was just a plaything in his eyes, had become the king of hell, who took his life in the blink of an eye. Third brother. Seeing their brother die tragically under the woman's sword. But they didn't even have the time to stop her. They didn't even see how she had attacked. After the scar-faced man recovered from his daze, his face revealed an expression of extreme grief and indignation. He let out a low roar, drew out the long saber at his waist, took a few steps forward and slashed at the woman. This move was made with all his strength, and even the air made a sound like it was ripping silk. Before today, it was unknown how many people had been cut in half by this large saber. Behind him, the man who had always had a calm expression finally showed a look of shock and anger. After the scar-faced man made his move, his figure instantly moved, sealing off the woman's path of retreat. In the face of the saber coming at her head, the woman did not dodge. Only when the saber was about to fall, the surrounding moonlight seemed to brighten. Inside the shack, Lee looked outside. There was only the faint shadow of the trees under the moonlight, and he couldn't see clearly. His line of sight to both sides was blocked by the shack. If he hadn't been hallucinating just now, there should have been a moment of noise outside, as if there had been the sound of weapons clashing, but it quickly returned to silence. Could it be that the three of them were fighting among themselves? Fight, fight, fight. It would be best if all three of them were injured. That way, he wouldn't have to think about how to escape. His right hand gently pulled back, and then he would go home and do what he had to do. With such a malicious thought in his heart, a strong wave of dizziness came over him. His body swayed, and he almost didn't have the strength to hold the saber. At this moment, the long-faced man, who had been waiting for an opportunity, suddenly tilted his head and avoided the blade. His body rolled forward and immediately rolled out of the shack. After escaping from that scholar's clutches, there was no longer a knife on his neck. He laughed wildly twice, thinking that once he got the formula for the Ruidu, he would definitely chop off that scholar's head with his own hands. After roaming the Jianghu for so many years, this was the first time he had encountered such a life and death crisis. The feeling of having a knife at my neck scared me to death. At the critical moment of life and death, he rolled quite a distance until his body collided with something, before he finally came to a stop. The long-faced man was about to use his hands to support his body and stand up. After reuniting with his three brothers, he would go in and deal with the scholar. Suddenly, he felt that the place where his palms touched was a little wet. It had not rained these days, and the ground was abnormally dry. This shack had been their temporary hiding place, and there was no water source nearby. Damn it, could it be that third bro is peeing everywhere again? Thinking of third bro's past bad habits, the long-faced man cursed angrily. He felt a little disgusted and rubbed his hands on the ground in disgust. What he felt was a kind of warm touch. He looked down and saw third bro's eyes filled with endless fear. He couldn't help but shiver. At this moment, his hand was placed on third bro's face. He turned his palm over and saw a dark brown substance. How was this water? It was clearly blood. Third bro. His face revealed a frightened expression. He reached out his hand and touched third bro's nose. His whole body couldn't help but shiver. Dead. The moonlight was very bright that night, and one could clearly see several feet away from them. Two familiar figures were lying on the ground a few steps away, just like third bro. They were in different postures, but they were both very quiet as the dead. Eldest bro, second bro, he cried out in fear. His heart was filled with fear. It was also at this time that the sound of light footsteps came from behind him. Under the night sky, a ray of light that was even brighter than the moonlight flashed by. The woman's face was expressionless. She held a blood-stained sword in her hand and looked coldly at the shack not far away. There's another one. In the shack, there was an indistinct breathing sound. It was very weak. She walked over and looked inside the shack. In the darkness, there was a figure lying there. There was no sound, and it was likely that he had been dead for a long time. Her footsteps paused. The short road in front of her seemed to be separated by thousands of mountains and rivers, making it difficult for her to move forward. There was no sound coming from outside for a long time. Finally, the sound of footsteps came to a stop. Lee held the knife in his hand. He had already bitten the tip of his tongue countless times, and he was barely able to stay conscious. It's over. I'm afraid I'm really going to die here. At this moment, he was truly at the point where he was at the end of his rope. If he waited any longer, he was afraid that his body wouldn't even need to wait for those people to come in. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came again. Li Yi hid at the side of the shack. When he saw the shadow on the ground flash in through the door, he stabbed the knife in his hand. Even though the enemy was strong and he was weak, he still had to try. What if those people walked in one after the other, and were caught off guard? What if he skewered them with his knife? The ideal scenario didn't happen. The knife was clamped by two slender and fair fingers. Li Yi looked at the woman who was emitting a faint glow under the moonlight. After a slight shock, he threw the knife away. Finally you. Rui. He heaved a long sigh of relief and opened his arms. I missed you so much. His body fell straight to the ground. So fragrant, so soft. His last consciousness disappeared. Rui hugged him. The coldness on his face finally disappeared. He looked up at the sky. The moon tonight was so beautiful. The corpse in the shack was not his. When Rui walked over, she could vaguely tell that the person who had died a horrible death was Wu Ying. He had been shot blind in one eye, and the fatal wound was from the knife that had slit his throat. One was a scholar who was not even considered a weakling. The other was a martial arts master who had reached a higher level. The four people outside were all good at martial arts too. Her pretty face was a little dazed. After a while, she leaned him against the wall of the shack and carried him on her back. She walked out and disappeared into the night. On the mountain road, Fong, who was holding a torch, shouted until his voice was hoarse. Along the way, there were spots of fire. Those were the people who were looking for Li Yi. A horse neighed from the forest. Fong turned around and with the help of the fire and moonlight, he saw a familiar figure on the horse. Second young mistress. He ran over in big steps. When he saw the person on Rui's back, his body trembled. His face was wild with joy. He said suddenly, Young master has been found. Rui nodded. Send someone back to inform them. We'll return to the prefecture immediately. Yes. Fong nodded vigorously. The big stone in his heart was finally lifted. He ran toward the fire in front of him. Chapter 202. After asking a man to go back to the village to report the news, Fong didn't delay, and once again rushed towards the direction of the prefectural city. Rui carried Li Yi, who had lost consciousness, on the horse. In order to avoid bumps, he didn't go very fast, but he could still arrive before the city gate was closed at night. Fong burst out at full speed. The first thing he did when he arrived at the prefectural city, before her, was to kick open the door of Huichun Hall. Huichun Hall was a medicine shop not far from Rui's workshop. It also served as a medical center. The shopkeeper of the medicine shop was a doctor with decades of medical experience. Last time, in order to buy medicine for the girl picked up by the son-in-law, Fong and the imperial physician went to Huichun Hall once. Compared with the polite knocking last time, the method this time was obviously more violent. The old doctor was still calculating the accounts in the hall. Suddenly, the door of the medicine shop was kicked open, and a strong man rushed in from outside. He thought it was a thief and was so scared that he almost couldn't breathe. After taking a closer look, he found that the man was the one who came with imperial physician Lu last time. Before he had time to speak, he was carried on the shoulder of the man and ran out. Hearing the noise, the apprentice of the medicine shop ran out from the back hall. Just when he ran into the hall, he saw Dr. Chen was taken away by a strong man. After a moment of daze, there was a panicked shout. Doctor, how is it? Seeing Dr. Chen withdraw his hand from feeling the pulse, Fong grabbed his arm and asked hurriedly. In Rui's workshop, Rui also stared at Dr. Chen. Don't worry. Just now, he was carried on the shoulder of Fong and ran all the way, so Dr. Chen's heartbeat had not calmed down. After a while he said, The county magistrate's injury is not light this time. The injury on the leg is a small matter. After applying some wound medicine from the medicine shop, it will not be a big problem. But the palm on the abdomen is probably a serious internal injury. Although it is not life-threatening, it will take a long time for him to completely recover. Although the man's rude behavior made him very unhappy, this Dr. Chen was still able to distinguish the importance of the matter. Let's do it this way. I'll write a prescription that focuses on nourishment and supplements it with medicine. The effect will be better this way. While Physician Chen was writing the prescription, Fong fiercely punched the wall and angrily said, "That bastard Wu Ying! If I ever meet him, I'll tear him apart." He had just learned from the second miss that the son-in-law was kidnapped by Wu Ying. In his heart, Fong had already cursed all the female members of his family. Wu Ying is dead. Hearing the doctor say that Li Yi's life was not in danger, Lu Rui was relieved. He looked at Fong and said calmly, "Ah." Fong was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously thought that it was the second miss who did it. He said with some regret, "It's really lucky that he didn't fall into my hands." Lu Rui didn't explain. She looked at the slightly frail figure lying on the bed again. Wu Ying could already be regarded as a master who had reached the next level. She knew better than anyone else how strong Li Yi was. Even 10 of him wouldn't be a match for Wu Ying. But in the end, Wu Ying died in his hands. Before she arrived, for men with good skills couldn't do anything to him. The man with the knife scar on his face wasn't any weaker than Wu Ying. She had to admit that this time, the image of him in her heart was somewhat changed. When Li Yi opened his eyes, the sunlight outside penetrated through the window. It was slightly glaring, and it took him a while to adjust to it. It was a very familiar bed, a very familiar room, and the Hello Kitty hanging on the wall was still smiling at him. Everything indicated that he should be in Rui's workshop now. In that case, the moment when he was at the brink of despair last night, the faint radiance of the moon goddess that he saw was not an illusion. Thank the moon goddess, thank Rui. It's good to be alive. From the angle of the sunlight, it should be late now. He had changed into a clean set of clothes, and the wound on his leg was bandaged again. Although his body was still very weak, the dizziness from yesterday was gone. He tried to support his body and sat up. There was a clang sound at the door. The copper basin in Xiao Huan's hand fell to the ground. After being stunned for a moment, she immediately screamed and ran out. "Son-in-law is awake." Li Yi could hear her voice from inside the room. The result of the scream was that not long after, the room that had only been him a moment ago was immediately filled with many figures. "Hee, everyone is here." The expression on Li Yi's face was a little awkward. Seeing that Li Yi had woken up, Fong and the others were finally relieved. After saying a few words, they all left the room. For a moment, only Li Yi and his family were left in the room. Lu Rui helped him to sit up from the bed and said, "I have already asked Uncle Fong to pass the message to the Yamen. My husband, just stay here and recuperate. You don't have to worry about other things anymore. I have just stewed chicken soup. Have some, my husband." Dr. Chen said that nourishment was the most important thing for his injury. Lu Rui picked up a bowl from the side and put a spoon to his mouth. "Let me do it myself." Li Yi hurriedly reached out to take the spoon. After growing up, he ate everything by himself and had never been fed by anyone. This kind of life was too corrupt. He could not guarantee that he could resist the temptation of the evil feudal society after becoming a pioneer. If he was not careful, he might fall into depravity. While drinking the soup, she asked about what happened last night, and Lu Rui also listened by the side. "By the way, when we go back, I have to thank Uncle Han properly." Li Yi put down the spoon, and his face became slightly solemn. If it was not for Uncle Han who helped him make the sleeve crossbow according to the blueprint, he would not be lying here now, but lying in some remote wilderness. He was able to successfully kill Wu Ying because of the sleeve crossbow. Of course, there was also the powerful knockout drug that he got from Dainyu. His soul came from the 21st century. To be honest, it was very difficult for him to accept killing someone. But when it really happened, he could not care less about these things. If Wu Ying did not die, he would be the one who died. Lu Rui nodded. In this case, Uncle Han could be considered to have indirectly saved him. So naturally, she would not mistreat him. She was just cooking when she was called in by Xiao Huan. At this moment, seeing that Li Yi was in good condition, she told him to rest well and left the room. "This time I didn't embarrass you, did I?" Li Yi turned to look at Lu Rui, and a smile appeared on his face. To a certain extent, he could be considered as Mississippi Lu's direct disciple. In the future, when he went out to travel in the martial world, He would not bring down her reputation when he talked about this matter. Not really. Lu Rui glanced at him, and the ice on her pretty face melted. Chapter 203. He was seriously injured this time. Rui said that Wu Ying's concealed strength in that palm. If he hadn't avoided the vital parts by chance, he wouldn't have been able to hold on until now. Even so, that palm had hurt his lungs. After a night's rest, his body was still weak, and he couldn't exert much strength. The feeling of being idle and bored was very uncomfortable. He wanted to go out for a walk. Although he was weak, he still had some strength to walk. However, Rui didn't allow it, so he had to lie on the bed and rest. There were several thin books at the foot of the bed, most of which were novels. They were bought on the street. He was bored at that time, so he just turned a few pages and didn't touch them. In fact, he only needed to think about what kind of book he wanted to read now, and the content of the book would appear in his mind by itself. There were no books in this world in the library, and he didn't need to buy them specially. After touching them, the same book would appear in his mind like copying and pasting. It was just that others couldn't see or touch it. However, he would get tired of it after a long time. If there was nothing urgent, he would rather hold a physical book in his hand and read it in the sun. It was a feeling that was hard to get rid of. Xiao Huan was afraid that he would be bored in the room alone, so she brought a small stool in and sat by the bed to chat with him. She talked about the missing rabbit. The second miss rode out to look for him, and the horse found him because it smelled the young master's scent. The horse's nose was really more sensitive than that of a dog's. It made a great contribution this time, so he should feed it more horse fodder when he went back. While the maid was talking, Fong came in from outside and told Li Yi that people from the county government came. They were County Magistrate Liu and County Magistrate Wang. County Magistrate Liu had just returned from the crime scene. It was a major case involving 5 lives. As the county magistrate, he had rushed over as soon as possible when such a serious case happened in the jurisdiction of Anxi County. Is County Magistrate Li all right? As soon as County Magistrate Liu entered the room, he walked to the bedside and asked with concern. He had known that County Magistrate Li was kidnapped by bandits, but he didn't have time to come here until the murder case was more important. Li Yi smiled and said, "Thank you for your concern, Lord Liu. It's no big deal. I'll be fine after a period of rest. It's just that I'm afraid I'll have to delay my official duties during this period. County Magistrate Li, take a good rest and don't worry about official business. I will arrange all these." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, "Thank you, Lord Liu." Li Yi cupped his hands. County Magistrate Liu said some polite words and asked about Li Yi's well-being. Then he looked at Li Yi and asked, "I heard that County Magistrate Li was kidnapped by those villains yesterday. Do you know how those villains died?" Thinking of the scene he had just seen in the wilderness, County Magistrate Liu felt a chill in his heart. 5 lives. They had already investigated 4 of them. They were bandits wanted by the neighboring prefectures, and they had a lot of cases on hand. Some time ago they fled to Anxi County. County Magistrate Liu had just received the official document from the Ministry of Justice. He only hoped that those guys would leave as soon as possible and not commit any more major crimes under his jurisdiction. Then, as expected, a major crime happened. The difference was that this time, the bodies of the 4 vicious bandits were exposed in the wilderness, and they looked very frightened, as if they had encountered something terrible when they died. Looking at County Magistrate Liu, Li Yi said solemnly, "To be honest, after being knocked out by those villains yesterday, it was already late at night when I woke up in the wilderness. I thought I couldn't escape, but I don't know why those people all died suddenly. Maybe they had an internal strife and died together." County Magistrate Liu stared at him for a long time and said, "I'm afraid that's the only possibility. Those villains deserve to die. As long as County Magistrate Li is safe, it's fine." Although he said so, he didn't believe it at all. The 4 people were all killed with one blow, and there was no sign of struggle or resistance before they died. Or it could be said that the people who killed them didn't give them a chance to resist at all. It couldn't be caused by an internal strife. The dead man in the shack was blind in one eye, and his throat was slit. The bloodstained knife on the ground was County Magistrate Lee's knife. When County Magistrate Lu looked at the smiling young man on the bed again, he suddenly felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. This case had come to an end. Those villains deserved to die. And those who killed them not only didn't do anything wrong, but also made meritorious service. As for the man in the shack, he was a famous ruffian in Anchi County, who intended to murder an official of the imperial court, and also died in an internal strife. County Magistrate Lee survived the disaster, and escaped from the villains, which was a great fortune and misfortune. Good people lived long and bad people died. This was the best ending. In this way, this case could be closed. County Magistrate Lee is not feeling well, so I won't bother you anymore. Due to the need of the case, County Magistrate Lu asked some details about how he was kidnapped. As for other things, he kept silent, seeming to believe that those people were killed because of internal strife. Not long after that, he naturally said goodbye to Zhang Tai. I'm not feeling well, so I won't see you off, Lord Lu. Seeing County Magistrate Lu and County Magistrate Wang walking out, Li Yi recalled the words revealed by County Magistrate Lu and County Magistrate Wang, and understood his attitude. Although he was a victim, it was a case involving 5 lives after all. If it was investigated further, it would be a little troublesome. This time he owed County Magistrate Lu a favor. Thinking of what happened yesterday, he was still a little depressed. He didn't offend anyone, but he met Wu Ying, that pervert, and almost died again. If Rui didn't come yesterday, would he travel through time again? Are you okay? Lying on the bed in a depressed mood, a familiar voice came from the door. Li glanced at Emingzu angrily. If he had been tied with more gauze, he would have become a dumpling. Did he look okay? Bring everything in. Emingzu turned around and said. Then 2 people carried a box in. What's this? Li looked up at him. It's the precious medicine in the palace. It's useless to put it aside. You can keep it. After the 2 people put down the box, they left. Emingzu walked in, followed by a white-haired old woman, who looked at Li Yi lying on the bed with her turbid eyes. What happened yesterday? Seeing that his face was a little pale, but it seemed that he was not seriously injured, Emingzu didn't worry anymore. She walked to the bedside and asked, Don't mention it. I met a lunatic. Li didn't want to continue this topic. Lunatic, you mean Wu Ying? Emingzu looked at him with a little curiosity. She looked at him and asked, How did you kill him? With her identity, it was only a matter of a word for her to investigate the identity of the dead in the shack. What she was curious about was that Wu Ying was a little famous in Anchi County, and had good martial arts. Excluding the possibility of a sneak attack, it was almost impossible for an ordinary person to blind his eyes from the front. Could it be that Wu Ying deliberately got in front of him for him to shoot? Moreover, even if he was blind, he wouldn't be killed so easily by an ordinary person. But in the end, even though there were too many strange things, he was still killed in the end. Although we are close, I can still sue you for slander if you talk nonsense like this. Li Yi was shocked. He looked at her and said loudly. Chapter 204. The girls of the Oldley family didn't have any major problems other than cheating others, drinking too much, and not being good with words. Just now they were talking about his injuries. Suddenly, they made a sharp turn and asked him how he killed Wu Ying. This caught Li Yi off guard. Internal strife. That's internal strife. Li Yi looked at her and reminded her. When I woke up, they were all lying on the ground. Other than internal strife, what else could it be? As for who killed Wu Ying, how would I know? Since they haven't been dead for long, let's find some Taoist priests and monks to summon their souls. Maybe we can get the answer out of them. Hee little boy, you're full of nonsense. Before Emingzu could say anything, the old woman behind him sneered and said, Those 4 guys' kung fu was excellent. They had committed many murders and fled to various prefectures. Who knows how many soldiers were killed by them? But all of them had their throats slit with a sword. They didn't even have the chance to resist when they died. It can be seen that the person who killed them was a master swordsman. Even if he hasn't reached the level of a grandmaster, he's still one of the best in the world. One of the best in the world. From the old woman's mouth, Li found out that Rui's kung fu was so powerful. While he was thinking, the old woman suddenly bent her fingers into claws and tried to grab his head. "What are you doing?" Her sudden action startled Li Yi, and he instinctively reached out to block it. But the old woman suddenly retracted her claws and shook her head, saying, "It's really not." Clang. The sound of a long sword being unsheathed came from the door. The old woman suddenly turned her head halfway through her words. "Who are you?" Lu Rui pointed his long sword at the old woman from afar, his face full of vigilance. The old woman and Li Mingzhu looked at the sword in her hand with a thoughtful expression on their faces. "Could it be this little girl?" the old woman murmured. Her figure suddenly flashed in the direction of Lu Rui. Although she was old, her speed was amazing. With Li Yi's eyesight, he only saw a shadow. In the blink of an eye, she appeared in front of Lu Rui. Lu Rui's pretty face turned cold when she saw the old woman, who seemed to want to harm Li Yi, turn to her. She shook the long sword in her hand, and the old woman withdrew her claws that were about to attack her neck. After a short confrontation, she had a general idea that this old lady was a powerful character. It would be unfavorable for her to display her strength in the room. After glancing at the old lady, she retreated. "Little girl's skills are not bad." The old woman smiled and chased after her. "Help me up." The two of them started fighting as soon as they met. Li Yi hurriedly got off the bed. Emingzi frowned, but still held onto his arm. "Don't worry, Granny Rong doesn't mean any harm." Li Yi could see that this granny didn't mean any harm. He was not worried that the old woman would do anything to Rui. The problem was that she had never seen Rui fight with others. It would be a waste not to see such a good show. He couldn't miss it. When he arrived at the courtyard, the sword in Rui's hand had already been thrown away. The old woman looked thin and weak, but she was not careless when she fought. The shadow of her claws flew everywhere. Li couldn't help but think of the Ninein white bone claw. Who's more powerful? Li didn't expect a white-haired old woman to be so powerful. He reckoned that even if he wasn't injured, he wouldn't be able to withstand her claws. Rui also didn't defeat the old woman in 2 or 3 moves as he had imagined. He didn't want her to know that there was always someone better than her. In the Yangtze River, the waves behind push the waves before, and the waves before die on the beach. "I don't know," Emingzi casually replied to Li Yi as she looked at the woman in the courtyard, whose clothes were fluttering in the wind. She didn't seem to be at a disadvantage at all after fighting with Granny Rong for more than a dozen moves. For the first time, a look of surprise appeared on her pretty face. Although Granny Rong looked old, it would be a big mistake to measure her strength based on her appearance. How could the person who was sent from the palace to protect her be a simple person? As a princess, the resources that she enjoyed were unimaginable. She learned martial arts from a young age, and there were masters in the palace who personally taught her. When she encountered difficulties, there were masters who solved her problems. She practiced martial arts for 10 years to reach the realm she had today. This realm was achieved bit by relying on all kinds of unique conditions. But the strange woman in front of her, who was about the same age as her, actually had this kind of strength. She looked back at Li Yi. Birds of a feather flocked together. He and the people around him were really freaks. There was a lot of noise in the backyard. Fong was sitting in the shop in front. When he heard the noise, he hurriedly ran out. When he saw that someone was fighting with the second miss in the yard, he didn't think much. After being stunned for a moment, he roared and rushed over. In the next second he flew out. After rolling on the ground in an undignified manner, he rubbed his aching chest and looked at the old woman, as if he was looking at a monster. "Oh my God, whose old woman is this? How can she be so powerful?" The person who could send him flying with a casual kick was actually such an old granny. If this happened to the old people in the stockade, their old arms and legs would have been broken long ago. Just now he was just excited. Now that he had calmed down, he quickly saw some clues. Although the two of them were fighting fiercely, their moves were relatively gentle. It didn't look like they were fighting with their lives, but more like they were learning from each other. Fong patted the dirt off his butt and leaned against the wall to watch the fight. "Hee hee, young lady, your martial arts are not bad." The old woman's attack was once again blocked by Lu Rui. A smile appeared on her wrinkled face as she praised her. "Not bad" was just an excuse. She knew very well that this woman's martial arts could not be described with just the word, not bad. The young woman in front of her was probably the master swordsman who killed the 4 escaped criminals last night. The martial arts world wasn't big, but it wasn't small either. In the small Qing'an prefecture, there were 2 master swordsmen at the same time. The possibility that they were both related to the little girl was too small. The old woman is not bad either. Lu Rui's expression was calm, but she was secretly shocked. This seemingly old woman was probably only 1 step away from the Grandmaster realm. The 2 of them seemed to be evenly matched, but they were just learning from each other. If they really fought with their lives on the line, she probably wouldn't be this old woman's match. She didn't have many opportunities to fight with outsiders. Yesterday, she killed someone in a fit of anger, which was also the first time in her life. After learning that Li Yi was fine, she recalled what happened and couldn't sleep for the whole night. She had always thought that most people in the martial arts world, who deceived the world, were like those 4 people. Today, when she fought with this old woman, she realized that there was always someone better than her. Young lady, didn't your master teach you not to be distracted when fighting with others? In a fight between masters, victory or defeat was decided in an instant. Her momentary distraction was naturally caught by the old woman. She chuckled and her claws suddenly sped up, reaching for her neck. By the time Lu Rui wanted to block, it was already too late. If it was a real life and death fight, there would only be one thing left for a person who was grabbed by the neck, such as the throat. Of course, the old woman didn't have such a thought. She didn't use any force. However, when her claws were about to touch the woman's neck, a white palm reached out from the side and covered her wrist. The palm pushed forward gently, and the old woman felt a gentle force coming from her wrist. She couldn't help but step back a few steps. If the princess hadn't come forward to support her, she would have fallen to the ground. What kind of kung fu is this? For the first time, the old woman's wrinkled face showed an extremely surprised expression. Mingzhu's eyes also moved to the face of the woman who just attacked. The simple push just now seemed familiar. After thinking for a while, she turned to look at Li Yi. I'm sorry. Lu Rui smiled at the old woman apologetically. Even if this old woman didn't mean to hurt Rui, there was no guarantee that there wouldn't be any accidents. For Rui's safety, Lu Rui still pushed her away. She used the force of Tai Chi. Whether it was hard or soft depended on her thoughts. Husband, who are these 2 people? She turned to look at Li Yi and asked with a smile. Chapter 205. He couldn't tell them that this was a princess who had nothing to do and always wandered outside. So he only introduced her according to the identity of an arrestor. It was normal for an arrestor from the Yamen to visit the county lieutenant. Emingzi came here just to see Li Yi and ask him what happened last night. Although Li Yi didn't say it directly, she could guess what happened after seeing the woman with the sword. She didn't intend to delve into this matter. After all, Li Yi's position in her heart was much more important than those villains. Of course, there were some unexpected gains. The young woman's martial arts was not weak. She had never met a match among her peers since she was a child. It was the first time that she met a peer that she didn't have the confidence to win. As for Li Yi's wife, the woman who appeared later, she seemed to be 1 or 2 years older than them. She easily forced the wet nurse to retreat, so she didn't want to compete with them. Although she didn't have any arrogance because of her martial arts, even the rare supreme masters in the martial arts world praised her as a rare martial arts genius. If she had enough opportunities, she might be able to step into the realm of supreme masters in her lifetime. However, the 2 women she saw today really made her suffer a big blow. Let's go. She had achieved her purpose of coming here. She waved her hand to Li Yi and turned to walk outside. The old woman followed her. Before leaving, she took a deep look at Lu Rui. The shock on her old face hadn't faded until now. You're leaving now. Don't you want to stay for dinner? Li Yi stood at the door and said aloud, Take good care of yourself. When you're well, report to the Yamen early. When the voice came, her figure also disappeared from Li Yi's sight. Li Yi shook his head. Why couldn't this woman be more sympathetic? He was injured like this, but she still wanted to exploit him. He didn't work for her family. Why was she so anxious? It seemed that he really worked for her family. He let out a long sigh. It was hard to be a superior, but it was even harder to be the superior of the boss's daughter. After the old lady left, there was nothing to see. Rui helped him to sit on the bed. Fong had already run over to open the big box that Emingzu had brought. Why are there so many small ones inside? After the lid was opened, Fong was a little surprised. He thought that there was something in the box, but he found that there were some small rectangular boxes in the big box. Oh my God, such a big ginseng. This is deer antler. Is this bird's nest? In front of Li Yi's family, Fong never treated himself as an outsider. He opened the boxes one by one and exclaimed in surprise. The things that Constable Li asked his men to carry were too valuable. Any one of them would probably be worth a lot of money. Having grown up in the mountains, he was extremely familiar with these medicinal herbs. Constable Li's family must be very rich, right? Xiao Huan stood beside Fong and muttered to herself when she saw his surprised expression. Not just rich, Constable Li's family is very rich. They have so much money that they can't even spend it all, Li Yi said as he sat on the bed. These things might be precious to ordinary people, but in the imperial palace, there was no lack of these things. As the richest person in the entire Jing kingdom, a few small medicinal herbs were nothing to him. Perhaps Her Royal Highness used bird's nest to rinse her mouth in the morning. However, based on her style of doing things, it was slightly beyond Li Yi's expectations that she could bring these things here. Lu Rui brought him back to the prefecture to look for a doctor after he was injured and unconscious yesterday. Given his current physical condition, it was not good for him to return to the village. As such, Xiao Huan and Rui stayed behind to take care of him. There were 2 rooms at the back of the courtyard that could be used as bedrooms. One was where Li Yi was currently sleeping, and the other was simply tidied up by Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan and Rui would sleep there at night. Last night, she waited alone in the village. When she heard that her son-in-law was injured, she felt uneasy the whole night. At dawn, she came down the mountain with Fong. By the time Rui finished cooking, the sleepy servant girl had already fallen asleep in the room. Just as Li Yi, who had turned into an injured person, was enjoying the degenerate life of having food, clothes, and even having someone to help him walk, the old woman who was walking with Li Mingzhu frowned and said in disbelief, "That's impossible. Even if that young lady started practicing martial arts in her mother's womb, it's impossible. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible." The old woman shook her head repeatedly. "Nanny, what's impossible?" From the beginning, Li Mingzhu could not help but turn to look at her in confusion when she saw her muttering to herself. "That girl named Rui." The old woman frowned. "How old is she? How is it possible? How is it possible that she has reached the Grandmaster realm?" "Grandmaster?" Emingzi looked at her and her beautiful eyes were filled with astonishment. The weight of these 2 words was very clear to anyone who practiced martial arts. There were many people who practiced martial arts in the entire Jing kingdom, but the number of grandmasters could be counted on 2 hands. As for those grandmasters, which one of them did not have decades of accumulation of martial arts to reach the realm of returning to one's natural state? Lu Rui, how old was she? Even if she started practicing martial arts in her mother's womb, it was impossible. One should know that she had practiced martial arts for 10 years and had been taught by countless famous teachers. Until now, she had not even touched the threshold of the Grandmaster realm. It was possible that she would never be able to enter that realm in her lifetime, let alone a commoner girl. Isn't this a little too inconceivable? Is it true that I'm old and my body is failing? The old woman raised her hands and looked at them with doubt on her face. After all, she still did not believe that the young girl had reached the legendary realm. Perhaps it was just that the young girl's kung fu was special. That force just now was both gentle and overbearing. She had lived for decades and fought with countless people, but it was the first time that she had encountered such a force. If she did not prepare in advance, she was afraid that anyone below the Grandmaster realm would be at a disadvantage. Looking up at Mingzhu's surprised expression, she shook her head and threw that unrealistic idea to the back of her mind. She comforted her. "Princess, your talent is already rare in this world. Don't be too disappointed. In my opinion, the internal energy that the two girls practiced was extraordinary. I'm afraid that it was not inferior to the martial arts in the palace. They must have been taught by a Grandmaster Realm Master for a long time. Otherwise, no matter how talented they are, they would not be able to reach the realm they have today. This Willow Leaf Village is not simple. Speaking of this, there was a trace of inexplicable meaning in her tone. Personally taught by a Grandmaster Realm Master, Emingza murmured. A Grandmaster Realm Master was already standing at the peak of martial arts. In order to seek a breakthrough, he was always elusive. Even if she was a princess, it was impossible for her to force a Grandmaster to follow her and carefully teach her since childhood. Could it be that there was a Grandmaster in Willow Leaf Village? Chapter 206. In the room, Rui was making the bed. Lu Rui walked in and said in surprise, "Sister, you've broken through?" The old lady who was fighting with her in the yard just now was extremely close to the Grandmaster realm. Judging from how her sister easily forced her to retreat just now, she was afraid that she had already entered the realm that all martial arts practitioners dreamed of. Lu Rui nodded and did not deny it. She said, "I've just broken through. I still need some time to stabilize." Although she said it in a light and breezy manner, her heart was still filled with astonishment at this unexpected matter. Although she was only one step away from the Supreme Power Realm, she might not be able to cross this step for the rest of her life. Hard work, talent, opportunity, and even luck were all crucial factors to cross this step. In the martial arts world, there were many masters who were one step away from the Supreme Power Realm, but there were only a few of them. It showed how difficult it was to cross this step. Thinking of the reason for her breakthrough, Lu Rui looked back at her and said, "After some time, I'll teach you Tai Chi. It should be helpful for you to break through the realm." Tai Chi. A trace of doubt appeared on Lu Rui's face. Wasn't this the messy punching method that Li Yi often used? He did not know martial arts and was full of nonsense. Lu Rui did not take her sister's nonsense to heart the last time she messed around with him. However, it was definitely not a spur-of-the-moment thing for her to mention this matter. Lu Rui was certain that it was not a spur-of-the-moment thing. Could it be? She suddenly thought of a ridiculous possibility and looked back at the door. In the yard, Li Yi was being supported by Xiao Huan. He was asking Feng to move the chair out. He always felt bored lying in the room. Compared to that, he preferred to bask in the sun in the yard. About an hour later, Lu Rui walked out of the room and looked at Li Yi, who was lying on the chair and telling a story to Xiao Huan. She was confused. At the same time, in the tile-roofed house next to Rui's house, the brothel, which usually only had a few customers, was now full. Some people were standing in the aisle, making it extremely crowded. The old storyteller sat on the stage with a serious face. His voice was hoarse, which was different from before, giving people a gloomy feeling. That evil ghost's skin was emerald green, and her teeth were extremely sharp. She only had white eyes but no pupils. She spread out a piece of human skin on the couch, and took out a colored brush to draw on it. Not long after, the evil ghost threw the brush down, and draped the human skin over her body. The evil ghost wearing the human skin turned into the woman who had returned home with Wang Sheng. The old man's voice was gloomy. As he told the story, he could make a strange sound that made people's hair stand on end. It was like the evil ghost's voice. Some people looked excited, some looked pale, but their eyes were still fixed on the old man, unwilling to move away for a moment. When they heard the exciting part, and saw that the old man was no longer speaking, they took out copper coins and threw them on the stage, urging loudly, "Hee hee, brother, I didn't lie to you, did I?" Among the crowd, a strong man looked at the pale man beside him and said with a smile. The man looked back at him and said with a trembling voice, I believe." At first, the man said that after hearing the story of the painted skin, he did not even dare to go to the toilet at night. He still did not believe it, and felt that the man was either too timid or exaggerated. After all, he was a frequent customer of these brothels, and had heard many strange stories, but he had never heard of one that could scare people like this. Today, he was dragged here by this man, and felt disdain in his heart. However, when he came here, he found that all the seats were occupied, and there was not even a place to stand in front. He could not help but be surprised. Even the busiest brothel had never seen such a bustling scene. Although the crowd was bustling, when the old man spoke, the entire brothel immediately became so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone held their breath. If anyone made the slightest noise, they would immediately be condemned by the crowd. Just now, he even saw a man who could not stop burping being thrown out by two men by the arm. He had never seen such a scene before, and he began to believe the man's words. As the old man slowly told the story, he no longer had the mood to doubt the man. It was not a cliché story about a gifted scholar or a beautiful woman, nor was it one of those ghost stories that he was tired of hearing. The story was novel and connected. Just as he was wondering why the Taoist priest said that Wang Sheng was a man who was about to die, the old man finally told him the reason. It turned out that the woman was actually an evil ghost in human skin. Just the thought of how the human skin was peeled off caused his face to turn pale. Just as he put himself in Wang Sheng's shoes, he realized that the beautiful woman who had been partying with him every night was actually an evil ghost. The old man's description of the evil ghost was so detailed and vivid that his mind could not help but think of that scene. Most importantly, the old man would occasionally let out a few ghostly cries, causing all the hair on his body to stand on end. Although he was afraid, there was also a different kind of pleasure that made him want to continue listening. If Li Yi was here, he would also be amazed. This old man was indeed a professional storyteller. Whether it was the creation of a terrifying atmosphere or the magical vocal skills, Li Yi would never be able to catch up to him. When Wang Sheng saw the painted skin of the evil ghost with his own eyes, the story had reached a climax. As expected, the old man stopped abruptly and said something along the lines of, "If you want to know what happens next, listen to the next chapter." Before the audience could react, the old man had already fled. "What do you mean? It's gone just like that. He's playing this trick again. I've heard this part 3 times already. I want to know what happens next." The silence of the crowd did not last long before it erupted like a volcano. Even the other brothels were affected. One by one, the performers and singers were performing, and their voices were suppressed. They could only watch as the customers left one by one and walked toward the brothels with grief and indignation on their faces. Yesterday and today, this was the second time their business had been stolen. This was too much, too much. At this moment, the old man was hiding behind the stage with a helpless look on his face. He also wanted to know what happened next, but that scholar only told him this part. Originally, he had wanted to give it a try and told the story of the painted skin last night. He did not expect so many people to come this morning, and it was hard for him to back down. If something like this happened again next time, his old bones would be torn apart by those people. Li Yi was telling a horror story to Xiao Huan in the courtyard to train her courage. Suddenly, a chaotic sound came from afar, and he and the young maidservant looked in the direction of the sound at the same time. Their vision was blocked by the courtyard wall. Just as they were about to look away, a head popped out from the wall. The next moment, Xiao Huan's face turned pale, and she subconsciously screamed. "A ghost!" Just a moment ago, the young master said that the ghost could still speak after its head was chopped off by the Taoist priest. The next moment, a head appeared on the wall. After the scream, the head on the wall disappeared. Li Yi heard a young girl's ouch from the other side of the wall. Chapter 207. Young master, did you just now over there? Xiao Huan rubbed her eyes. The head that just popped out from the top of the wall had disappeared. She hid behind Li Yi and pointed at the top of the wall. Her voice was still trembling. There was a rustling sound outside the wall. When she pointed, the head popped out again. This time, he could see clearly that the owner of the head was a girl about the same age as him. She had light makeup on her face and she looked pretty. Her face was not as pale as the young master had described. Her eyes were 2 big black holes, and her tongue was not even 5 feet long. So it was not a ghost. "What are you screaming for?" The girl who stuck her head out from the other side of the wall glared at Xiao Huan. She rubbed her sore butt and looked at the young man lying on the chair in the yard. She was playing in the yard when she heard a familiar voice coming from outside the wall. She put her ear to it and listened. At first, she did not know who the voice belonged to. Later, she was scared by the ghost story the voice told and finally remembered. It was the young man who scared her with the story of painted skin in the brothel yesterday. He moved a stool from the house and placed it under the wall of the courtyard. He stuck his head out to take a look, but just as he steadied himself, he was frightened by the little girl's ghostly cry. He lost his footing and fell down. Even now his buttocks were still aching. When she got up and looked at the young man again, she saw that his leg was wrapped in white cloth. She asked curiously, "What happened to you?" "I was bitten by a dog when I went home last night." Li looked at the girl called Xiaozhu who was lying on the wall, and said casually, "Oh." Xiaozhu looked at him, and could already imagine that he had not only been bitten by the dog last night, but had also had a desperate struggle with the vicious dog. "Can you tell me the story after painted skin?" The girl called Xiaozhu leaned on the wall and looked at Li Yi. Her big eyes were filled with expectation. Yesterday, after the young man left, she told the story to Grandpa Sunday. Grandpa Sun originally planned to wait until he heard the complete story before he tried to tell it on stage. However, he didn't expect that yesterday afternoon, those men who heard the story pulled a lot of people over and insisted on listening to the story of the painted skin. Grandpa Sun had no choice but to tell the first half of the story. As a result, in less than a quarter of an hour, the money that the guests gave was equal to the income of the whole brothel for a day. Unfortunately, the story only lasted for half an hour. Grandpa Sun stopped abruptly at the exciting part. The guests left disappointed. Although they did not ask for the money back, they did not have anything good to say. If they could hear the story after painted skin, they would not have to worry about their livelihood in a short time. After all, for ordinary actors and actresses like them, money was the only way to survive. They were not like those famous actors and actresses who were often invited by high officials and nobles to perform, and were often rewarded handsomely. "Sure." Li looked at the girl and said. Wang Xing hid outside the window and peeped at the evil ghost's painted skin. He screamed in fear and was discovered by the evil ghost. He was cut open and his heart and lungs were dug out. He died. Xiao Huan looked at the girl leaning on the wall, and then looked at the son-in-law. She was puzzled. The painted skin that the son-in-law told second miss was not like this. Although she did not dare to continue listening, she knew that there should be a long story behind it. Of course, other than being puzzled, she was also curious about who this girl was. She seemed to know the son-in-law, and the son-in-law even told her the story of painted skin. This is the end. The girl leaned on the wall with a blank expression on her face. Under normal circumstances, shouldn't the following story be more complicated and bizarre? Wang Sheng died just like that. What about the expert she met on the street? This was completely illogical. She was sure that if Grandpa Sun told the story like this, the guests would definitely not throw money on the stage, but shoes and stones. Despicable guy. Knowing that he was perfunctory, she resisted the urge to remove a clay brick from the wall and threw it over. She weighed her foot and said, "I will steal a few pieces of osmanthus cake from Sister watching for you." "How many pieces?" Li looked up at the wall. 5 pieces. The girl gritted her teeth and said, 10 pieces. Li directly doubled the number. 6 pieces, no more. "I won't do it without 9 pieces. After a fierce bargaining, the price was finally set at 7 pieces of osmanthus cake. The girl did not give in at all. Stingy. Seeing that the girl went down the wall, probably to steal the osmanthus cake, Li curled his lips. At such a young age, she already knows how to bribe. This girl will be amazing when she grows up. Son-in-law, what osmanthus cake? Xiao Huan was stunned. She also knew how to make osmanthus cake. Why did the son-in-law ask that girl for it? That time when we guessed the lantern riddles, in that something building. After Li Yi's reminder, Xiao Huan finally remembered, and then she was a little depressed. The osmanthus cake she made was indeed not as delicious as that time. This time, the waiting time was not short, at least more than a quarter of an hour before the girl's head poked over the wall. Here you are. She handed over something wrapped in a handkerchief from the other side of the wall. Xiao Huan was too short to reach it, so she went to the shop and called Fang out. She took the handkerchief from the girl and gave it to Li Yi. Opening the handkerchief, there were 7 pieces of osmanthus cake, not one more, not one less. Give me back the handkerchief, the girl said from the wall. What's the hurry? I will give it back to you after I finish eating. If he gave the handkerchief back to her, there would be nothing left to wrap the osmanthus cake. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Then give me back the piece you took yesterday. The girl thought for a moment and said, The handkerchief was a girl's more private item. It was a bit inappropriate for a strange man to take it. That piece. Li Yi thought of the handkerchief that was used to wrap the remaining osmanthus cake yesterday. It seemed that he had put it away casually. He didn't see it today, so he probably dropped it on the road yesterday. I lost it. He looked at the girl and said, You. The girl almost fell off the stool in anger. Just as she was about to say something, a voice came from inside the house. Yuju, did you see the osmanthus cake I just put in the room? I will come back later. A trace of panic flashed across the girl's face. She hurriedly jumped off the stool and ran into the house. Sister were watching. I didn't see it. 7 pieces of osmanthus cake. One was given to Fang and one to Xiao Huan. Perhaps hearing the movement just now, Lu Rui also came out of the room. Looking at the thing in Li Yi's hand, she asked in confusion, Husband, where did you get it? A neighbor gave it to me. Li Yi stretched out his hand and said, Do you want one? One piece was given to Rui, and the other 2 pieces were snatched away by Rui, who happened to bump into him. Looking at the 2 pieces of osmanthus cake left in his hand, Li Yi regretted it a little. He should have insisted just now. Maybe he could have asked for a few more pieces. Speaking of which, this little girl is quite easy to deceive. I don't have to worry about eating osmanthus cake in the future. Chapter 208. Many things were always treasured after they were lost. Before, Li Yi felt that being a county lieutenant was boring. He was always entangled by trivial things that had nothing to do with him. He would rather lie at home or bask in the sun in the courtyard of Rui's workshop. Now, his wish to lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun had really come true. Since he was injured, his range of activities was limited to his room and this small courtyard. If he wanted to go through the shop to have a look outside, he would be stopped by Fang. Xiao Huan and Rui returned to the stockade village. Since they were going to stay here for a while, they naturally needed to bring some daily necessities and change of clothes. Rui also went back, leaving Li Yi alone in the courtyard. He was the only one in the courtyard, and there was no one to talk to. After a while, Li Yi began to miss the girl named Piglet. At least, there was someone to talk to, so he wouldn't be bored. Even if he had countless books in his head to relieve his boredom, he couldn't compare with the beautiful young girl in her 20s. It didn't take long for the beautiful young girl to climb up the wall again. Phew. Sister Ruoqing finally went out. The young girl looked back and let out a long sigh of relief. Seeing that Li Yi was still lying on the chair in the courtyard, she was relieved. Don't tell Sister Ruoqing about the osmanthus cake. This time, the young girl seemed to have put the chair under her feet a little higher, so she could fold her arms and lie on the wall. She looked at Li Yi and said this. Don't worry. After getting a positive answer from Li Yi, the young girl stared at him with big sparkling eyes, waiting for him to fulfill his promise. Li Yi didn't want to lie to a young girl. Besides, it was not easy for someone to talk to him, so he adjusted to a comfortable position and said, Wang Xing climbed over the wall and returned home. Yes, I have. Last time, I said that Wang Xing peeped outside the window at the female ghost painting her skin on the bed. The young girl said hurriedly, What's the rush? What's the rush? I haven't gotten into the zone yet. Li Yi glanced at her, then slowly said, Wang Xing was very scared when he saw that the female ghost had turned into a woman who played with him every night. He was so scared that his soul almost flew away. Finally, he remembered the Taoist priest he met on the street and hurriedly chased after him. The girl's expression was focused. She secretly memorized the plot that he said, and then passed it on to Grandpa Sunday. With the follow-up story, those customers would probably give more money, right? The original story of the painted skin was not long. Wang Sheng saved a woman and hid it in his house despite his wife's advice. However, the woman turned out to be an evil ghost. After digging out Wang Sheng's heart and lungs, she escaped. Later, she was killed by a Taoist priest with a peachwood sword. Wang Sheng's wife found an extraordinary person and saved Wang Sheng. The ending was a happy one, but the plot was full of twists and turns. Speaking of which, there was even a little erotic element to it, which made it more attractive to men. It had the elements to sell well in this world. The original painted skin was only about 2,000 words. Unlike the old man, Li Yi did not have to add to the atmosphere from time to time. It was similar to a flat and straightforward narration. It did not take long for him to reach the ending. Thank you for your story. I'll leave first. Remember to keep the osmanthus cake a secret. After listening to the story, the girl had achieved her goal. Her feet were a little numb after standing for a long time. She wanted to quickly tell Grandpa Sun before she forgot the plot. Rui and the others had not returned from the village yet. If the girl left, who could he talk to relieve his boredom? Fang. After thinking about it, he gave up. There was too much of a generation gap, and it was not easy to communicate. Seeing that the girl turned her head and was about to jump down, Li Yi spoke again. For the sake of the osmanthus cake, in addition to the painted skin, I'll give you another story called Ing Ning. Ing Ning? The girl's movements slowed down. She turned around and looked at Li Yi again. There was actually a buy one get one free deal. The scholar Prince Fu met a beautiful woman at the Lantern Festival. He picked up the plum blossoms that the girl had dropped. After returning home, he missed her so much that he fell ill. It was another story that she had never heard before. The girl immediately stopped thinking about it and listened carefully. One painted skin could only solve the problem temporarily. When the customers got tired of listening to it, the brothel would still face the same predicament as before. Of course, the more stories there were, the better. At this moment, she was even thinking that she must get the stories of Legend of the White Snake and a Chinese ghost story that this gentleman had told her previously. Anyway, the price was only a few pieces of osmanthus cake. Even if elder sister Ruoqing found out, she probably wouldn't blame her. Moreover, she had eaten quite a lot of them before. This time, it was naturally not for the sake of telling a story. Li Yi slowed down the speed of his narration. Sometimes, the girl would interrupt and ask some questions that she did not understand. Hee, that missing Ning is so innocent. When the girl spoke again, she raised her head and looked forward. Suddenly, she shrank her head back. While Li Yi was puzzled, there was a sound of messy footsteps behind him. He turned around and saw a few people passing through the shop and walking towards the courtyard. Fang did not stop them because they were all acquaintances. Li Xian asked the guards behind him to carry boxes of different sizes into the courtyard. While he walked towards Li Yi, I heard from Emingzi that you were injured, so I came to have a look. The people of the Li family were very polite, unlike County Magistrate Liu, who came to visit the patient empty-handed. Not to mention whether he was secretly happy in his heart. At least these gifts showed enough sincerity. In fact, Li Yi hadn't seen Li Xian for many days. A few days ago he was still curious. With Li Xian's personality, it wasn't normal for him to hold back for so long and not look for him to refresh his worldview. When he raised his head to look at him, he was stunned and said doubtfully, I haven't seen you for a few days. Why do you look so haggard? Even if you go to the Jade Courtyard every day, it shouldn't be like this, right? Speaking of this matter, Li Xian could not help but smile bitterly. He waved his hand and said, Don't mention it. Since Mother's birthday banquet, Father has not allowed me to step out of the prince's mansion. He invited several great scholars to teach me some inexplicable things all day long. It's so annoying. If Emingzi did not go to the prince's mansion to visit Mother, and let me find such an excuse to come out, I'm afraid that I would still be facing those troublesome old guys in the prince's mansion. He looked at Li Yi, who was leisurely lying in the courtyard and basking in the sun, and his face was full of envy. As a dignified prince, His life was not as carefree as his. Naturally, his heart was extremely depressed. Let's go. I've been bored to death in the prince's mansion these days. It's not easy to come out today. I'd like to invite you to the Jade Courtyard to relax. Looking at him, he did not look like he was seriously injured. Li Xian shook his head and stopped thinking about these annoying things. He looked at Li Yi and said, Ahem, I'm seriously injured this time. I'm afraid it's not convenient. You should go by yourself. Li Yi said with a dry cough. Where? Just as Li Xian was about to speak, he suddenly felt a chill run through his body. He quickly turned his head and saw a few figures standing behind him looking at him. The little servant girl who won with 2 stones, the heroine who could fly in the sky, and Li Yi's wife that he saw the other day. Ahem, hello sister-in-law. Looking at the woman in the middle, Li Xian's expression froze. He then copied Li Yi and coughed dryly. His expression was incomparably awkward. Chapter 209. Xiao Huan secretly asked Uncle Fong what kind of place the Jadeite courtyard was, and why this young master wanted to invite her son-in-law to the Jadeite courtyard to relax. Could he relax by going to the Jadeite courtyard? After getting a vague answer from Fong, the servant girl looked at Li Xian as if she was guarding against a thief. Now, she already understood what a place like a brothel was for. This young master was too evil to want to bring her son-in-law to such a place. If not for the fact that he carried boxes of gifts into the courtyard when he came, Xiao Huan might not have chased him away, but she would not have served him tea like now. Watching her son-in-law talk to him in the courtyard, Xiao Huan stood far away but did not leave. She was always on guard against any bad ideas he might have. On the other hand, Fong looked at Li Xian with a look of appreciation. The Jadeite courtyard was a place he had always wanted to enter. He had not seen her for a long time, and he wondered how Miss Little Hong was doing. The young maidservant stood behind the pillar, constantly on guard. Further away, old Fong leaned against the wall of the courtyard. His usually simple and honest face had a rather complicated expression on it. Teaching some strange things, don't you like these? Li Yi thought of what Li Xian had said and looked up at him. Although what you said is strange, it is the truth of heaven and earth that has been verified. How can you say it is strange? Li Xian's face showed a gloomy expression again. He said, they teach history, poetry, calligraphy and painting, even writing, archery and battle formations. When Li Yi heard this, he also had some doubts in his heart. History, poetry, calligraphy and painting. These were almost the necessary skills for scholars in this world, especially those young princes and princes. They would probably receive strict instruction from a young age. Although they would not be allowed to participate in the imperial examinations, this was the embodiment of the education of the royal family. The members of the royal family might have many flaws in their character, but they were rarely mediocre. Of course, the descendants of the imperial family were different from those coquettish sluts outside. Not only the emperor, but the entire world would keep an eye on them. They would be groomed in all aspects from a young age. They would be able to control women with their pen. They would be able to bring peace to the world with their pen. And they would be able to control the world with their martial arts. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were well versed in both the pen and the sword. However, none of this seemed to have anything to do with Li Xian. Those sons of the imperial house had been educated from a young age. Logically, Li Xian should have had this experience long ago. Ning Wang wanted him to relearn these things. Did he want him to become the top scorer? Li Yi was a little disappointed in his heart. If Li Xian could maintain his previous enthusiasm and go further on that road, he might really become an outstanding scientist in the future. His name would also be remembered by future generations. However, now he was forcibly led to the wrong path and learned those useless things. A scientific genius was strangled in the cradle like this. In the next few thousand years, people might still remember the Jing kingdom that once existed, but there should not be many people who remembered this generation's Emperor Jing. If Ning Wang did not do anything earth-shattering in this life such as rebellion, the only people who knew about Ning Wang were those old scholars who studied the history of the Jing kingdom. As for Ning Wang's son, who would be so free to investigate these things? Looking at Li Yi's regretful eyes, Li Xian sighed. He missed the free and unfettered days before. If he could be as leisurely as Li Yi, even if he was a little injured like him, he would be willing. You have a lot of bad ideas. There is one more thing, you have to help me. Suddenly, as if he remembered something, Li Xian turned to look at him, his eyes shining. If it weren't for the fact that he was injured, Li Yi wouldn't have cared if he was a little prince or not. Li Xian did not feel that there was anything wrong with what he said just now. He looked at Li Yi hopefully and asked, "Father has arranged a marriage for me, but I do not want to get married yet. Is there any way to break the engagement?" As the saying goes, it is better to tear down 10 temples than to regret a marriage. There would be retribution for doing such an immoral thing. However, this was not what Li Yi was thinking about now. He now doubted whether Li Xian was a man or not. In this era, people generally got married at a young age. 15 was the age for marriage. If they were not married after 16, they would be like Rui and invite the official matchmaker to their home. Of course, the official matchmaker would not dare to go to Ning Wangfu to force a marriage, even if he had 10 guts. However, Li Xian was almost 20 now. Even he was forced to leave his single life, but he, as the heir, was still a single dog. This was really not normal. Although he kept saying Jade Yard all day long, Li knew that he was not enlightened on the matters between men and women. To be honest, although Li had not experienced this kind of thing in his 2 lifetimes, he would think about it occasionally. It was just that he and Rui had not changed their respectful way of getting along, so it was naturally impossible for them to consummate the marriage like a real husband and wife. As an old single dog, the first thing he thought of after the engagement was not to be wild with joy, but to destroy it. Li began to worry about his sexual orientation. He turned his head to look at Li Xian, and found that he was looking at him with a fiery gaze. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? No, this was a matter of principle. Although this guy was not bad looking, and had a good family background, he had a normal sexual orientation. It was the right way to get Rui as soon as possible. He would not succumb to his despotic power. Fong, see the guest off. He could not continue this conversation, and he could not come up with any ideas, so he hurriedly summoned Fong over. Fong, who trotted over, did not know what had happened, but was quickly driven away by Li Xian. Fong now knew that this pretty boy who had a close relationship with the son-in-law had a very high background. He could not afford to provoke either of them. It was the right way to protect himself. Are you serious? Li looked at him again and asked. Li Xian nodded, and the expression on his face could not be any more real. Is that girl ugly? Li was very curious. To be rejected by Li Xian so resolutely. That girl must be so ugly that even ghosts and gods would cry. Li Xian shook his head. I have seen her portrait. She is as beautiful as a flower, and is a rare beauty in the world. Li was not surprised about this. Although this little prince was not very reliable, he was the only son of Prince Ning, and he would inherit the title in the future. Choosing a concubine was a very important matter, and it could not be done so carelessly. The current concubine would be the future concubine. To some extent, it represented the face of the royal family. Naturally, it was impossible to choose an ugly one. He had seen Princess Ning, and also the Empress. Although the two were no longer youthful, from their current charm, it could be seen that they must have been great beauties when they were young. This showed that Prince Ning and the Emperor's aesthetic was normal, unlike a certain dynasty in the future, where there were 3,000 beauties in the harem, and none of them were good-looking. Since he had such a beautiful fiancée, why did he break the engagement? Returning to the original question, Li looked at him and asked tentatively, You wouldn't like men, right? Chapter 210. Li Yi's suspicion made Li Xian feel insulted. He tried to explain that his sexual orientation was normal, but after thinking about it carefully, he felt that Li Yi's suspicion was not unreasonable. If Li Yi told him that he wanted to divorce the beautiful woman named Lu Rui, perhaps Li Xian would have the same suspicion as him. It's not strange that you don't want to admit it. In fact, sometimes, you don't even realize that you like men. Li gave a scientific explanation. In this era's upper-class society, Some people even regarded this as a very elegant thing. If Li Xian really had this tendency, Li Yi would not discriminate against Li Xian who liked men. However, not discriminating was not discriminating, he still had to keep a distance. Don't worry, liking men is not a shameful thing. There's no need. Hey, why are you looking at me like that? He suddenly raised his voice. After a moment, Li Yi spoke again. Actually, there is a way. Li Yi was worried that if he did not give him an explanation today, he would start to have ideas about him. After listening to Li Xian's solemn explanation again, Li Yi roughly understood why he wanted to ruin this marriage. In this era where the parents' orders and the matchmaker's words dominated the marriage, before marriage, no matter how the other party looked, it was the same as covering them with a quilt. Didn't most people live like this? However, in every era, there were awakened people and pioneers who were unwilling to follow the crowd. Li Xian probably belonged to this kind of people. He could not accept that the person who would accompany him for the rest of his life was a woman who was still very unfamiliar to him. For this reason, he would rather be a single dog for a few more years. His thinking was so simple that it even made Li Yi feel a little respect in his heart. After all, in today's world, there were not many people who had such avant-garde thinking. Now go to the streets. If you see a beautiful woman, get those guards to tie her up on the streets. Tie her up in a secluded place. I don't need to teach you what to do next, right? If you think one isn't enough, you can kidnap a few more. In this way, I'm sure no clan would be willing to marry their young lady to you. Once and for all, why not? Li Yi looked at him and suggested with a serious expression. Leading a group of lackeys to tease innocent women on the streets was something he had always dreamed of. Unfortunately, he did not transmigrate well. A poor scholar naturally did not have that many lackeys, so this dream could only be postponed indefinitely. However, Li Xian was different. He was a young prince. When he went out, there would always be a few bodyguards with extraordinary martial arts. Wouldn't kidnapping a few girls be a piece of cake for him? Li Xian had been waiting expectantly for Li Yi's brilliant plan, but after listening to him, the look of anticipation on his face froze. Harming innocent women. This was a really good idea. If he really did that, of course this marriage could be ruined. As a prospective princess, the woman's family was also one of the few big families in the Jing kingdom. She was even qualified to marry a prince. Naturally, they would not allow the noble daughter of the family to marry a man with a moral character, even if the other party was the heir to the throne in the future. Of course, if the marriage was ruined, there would not be much impact. With the power of the prince's mansion, they could quickly settle the matter, and even find the heir's consort. There would still be countless people eyeing that position. However, not to mention whether his father would let him off easily. Even he himself could not accept such a thing. This suggestion was equivalent to not saying anything. He knew that this matter involved many people, so he could not let Li Yi be involved. He looked deeply at Li Yi and waved his hand helplessly. Let's go. When he asked Li Yi just now, he actually did not have much hope in his heart. Although he was born into a noble family, whether it was the power or the wealth in his hands, it was something that ordinary people could never hope to achieve in their lifetime. In the future, he would inherit his father's throne, and his status would be above tens of thousands of people. He could be said to be the favored son of the heavens with unlimited glory. However, this did not mean that he could decide everything. In fact, he did not have the power to decide most things. Of course, this included marriage. In the past 10 years, he had been walking the path set by others. He could only find some fun under the premise that he did not go astray. For example, he hid his identity and mingled in the circle of scholars. Like them, he wandered around the big brothels, but every time, he only listened to music. Of course, these were all small fun. After meeting Li Yi, he found the real fun in life. It was as if a wider world had opened up for him. Only Li Yi was different from those who only knew how to flatter and flatter. Li Yi could make him temporarily forget his identity as a prince, and get along with others as an ordinary person in the way he liked. However, the current him was feeling more and more pressure from all sides. Even going to the jadeite courtyard to listen to music like before had become an extravagant hope. He could only hope that there would be such a place in the future. There was no little prince here, only Li Xian. He could sit opposite Li Yi with a Mingzu without any scruples. And the table was full of delicious and novel dishes. The man surnamed Fong stood not far away and looked at them bitterly, probably scolding them in his heart for robbing his seat and food. He could also smile and say, "Hello, sister-in-law," to the beautiful woman, and then turn back to discuss with Li Yi why the earth was a ball. Therefore, the topic just now must end here. Watching Li Xian leave with a few guards with a lonely face, Li Yi let out a long sigh. What he said just now was naturally nonsense. Based on Li Xian's character, he would not do something like kidnapping a good woman. He wanted to help Li Xian, but he could do nothing about this matter. Even a fool knew that the marriage of the royal family, or the royal family, was not so simple. Behind every marriage, if there was no political purpose, Li Yi would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. If he really helped Li Xian mess up this matter, Prince Ning would probably be the first to not let him go. Even though he had saved the princess and the emperor, he would not use this to gamble on where Prince Ning's bottom line was. In the eyes of these bigwigs, there was no eternal kindness, only eternal benefits. With his small arms and legs, he could not resist Prince Ning's thick thigh. If he really provoked Prince Ning, he could only pack up his belongings and run away with Rui and the others. If Prince Ning went too far, he would ask Rui to secretly slit his neck in the dead of night, vent his anger, and continue to run away. Li Xian's figure had disappeared at the door of the shop. Li looked in that direction for a long time, with a trace of helplessness on his face. "Sorry." The voice was so soft that only he could hear it. Chapter 211. The heavens were fair. Everyone gained something, but at the same time, they would lose something else. As a member of the royal family, Li Xian didn't have to worry about food and clothing from the moment he was born. Every day, he had a large group of servants by his side, respectfully calling him Little Prince and Little Prince. In this Qing and prefectural city, he could be said to have everything he wanted. If he was in a good mood, he could bring a large group of guards to tease women on the streets, visit brothels without paying, and even bully prostitutes every day. It wasn't a big problem to realize the dreams of the majority of his fellow men. In this era where the rule of man was greater than the rule of law, for a little prince, these weren't big things at all. However, because he was a little prince, there were many things that he couldn't decide himself. Disregarding other things, at least when it came to marriage, he who had advanced ideas was still like most people. He was bound by the orders of his parents and the words of the matchmaker. He didn't have any room to choose. In fact, he was even more pitiful than those people. Because his marriage was bound to be mixed with politics or other factors, it was destined to not be so simple. The two of them had known each other for a long time. Although Li Yi had almost completely integrated into this place, and there was no barrier between him and Rui, Xiao Huan, and Fong. Speaking of true friends, the only one who could be said to be Li Xian, whose actions were also out of touch with this era. It was a pity that the things he was born with would one day become a burden on his shoulders. This was something that Li Yi couldn't change and couldn't change. Not everyone could live the life they wanted. These things could only wait for him to slowly adapt to. When his gaze moved from the door of the shop to the top of the wall, the young girl listening to the story had long disappeared. "Young master, it's cold outside. Do you want me to help you in?" It was winter. Even if the weather was good, there were only 2 hours in the afternoon when one could bask in the sun. After that, it gradually became colder. When Xiao Huan walked into the courtyard again, she felt a slight chill and walked over to speak to Li Yi. "There's no need to enter the house. Let's take a walk outside." After lying down for a long time, Li Yi really did not want to return to that bed. At this time, he also did not have the mood to tell the servant girl stories to relieve her boredom. He supported his body and slowly stood up from the chair. If he continued to stay in such a small courtyard, he would really die of boredom. "Son-in-law, you were injured yesterday, you can't go out." Xiao Huan hurriedly ran over to support him, wrinkled her nose and said. Li Yi waved his hand, and didn't let her help him. After lying down for a while, he had regained some of his strength. It was not to the point where he needed help to walk. "I won't go far. I'll just take a stroll in the house next door." The wound on his leg didn't hurt his muscles or bones. As long as he didn't travel long distances, there wouldn't be any problems. At this moment, he finally understood why there weren't as many otakus in ancient times as there were in modern times. Without mobile phones and computers, most people were illiterate and had nothing to do to pass the time. Those who stayed at home were bored to death. It was no wonder that the business of the brothels and taverns was so good. Those who had nothing to do would only drink and gamble, which were the few hobbies left. "Then I'll go ask Miss first." She didn't have the power to make a decision on this kind of matter. After saying this, the servant girl quickly ran away. Seeing her quickly run to find Rui, Li sighed in his heart. This little girl was really hard to raise. He was the one who told her stories. And he was also the one who bought her clothes, jewelry, and snacks. For such a small matter, he actually had to report to Rui, "My husband's body is weak. Don't go far. Let Uncle Fong follow." Rui agreed in the end. The condition was that Fong was brought along. After experiencing what happened yesterday, she was also worried about letting Li go out alone. Fong was very happy about this task. Going out with the son-in-law was much better than staying here to look after the shop. Moreover, he suffered a lot last night. Now he had to see him personally to be at ease. The entrance of Hua City was not far from Rui Square. It was Xiaohuan's first time to enter such a place. She was very curious about everything around her. In the sheds by the roadside, there were many people performing. For a moment, she didn't know which one to see. Fong had been here before. In the past, he didn't want to spend a few copper coins. Later, he didn't lack money anymore. On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, he specially went to another Hua City. Li still chose the brothel that he had been to before. The place was spacious and comfortable. After entering the door, his expression was slightly stunned. In the brothel today, there were more customers than the previous 2 times. Although it was not a full house, the good seats were all occupied. Li, Xiaohuan and Laofeng could only choose a secluded seat. Just as they sat down, the young waiter ran over to them eagerly. "Sir, what would you like?" Asking each customer what they would like to order was actually a standard routine here. Although the tea was only sold for 2 copper coins per pot, if each customer could order a pot of tea, wouldn't it be a considerable income for the restaurant? Just as the waiter opened his mouth, he saw a young face and immediately said, "I know, a pot of tea, right? Please wait for a moment, the tea will be served soon. Come back." The waiter just turned his head and Li waved his hand. "Do you have any other orders, sir?" The waiter hurriedly turned his head. 2 pots this time. Li glanced at Fong. 1 pot of tea might not be enough for 2 people in Fong. This time, it wasn't the old storyteller on stage. Instead, it was a female singer who was singing. Her voice was quite pleasant to the ears, and there were a few female dancers behind her. Ever since old Fong entered the room, his eyes had never left the singer. If the stage wasn't too small, and the audience was too small, it would really feel like a concert in the future. Li suddenly had a strange idea. If he built a venue that could accommodate tens of thousands of people in this world, and held a few concerts, what kind of scene would it be? Then he felt that it was impossible to realize this idea. After all, there were no microphones or sound systems here. The venue was so big that even if the loudest singer shouted herself hoarse, she wouldn't be able to be heard by everyone in the venue. "Your tea." A clear and somewhat familiar female voice came from the opposite side. The girl who listened to his ghost story on the wall placed 2 pots of tea on the table and sat opposite Li. Her eyes met with Xiaohuan's. The 2 people who were scared at the same time just now snorted and turned their heads away, no longer looking at each other. Chapter 212. That Ying Ning, you haven't finished. After sparking with Xiaohuan's gaze, the girl turned her head and said to Li. She had already told Grandpa Sun the complete story of the painted skin. After listening to Ying Ning, Grandpa Sun had another story that others didn't know. which could attract many customers. Grandpa's son only told the first half of the painted skin twice, but the number of customers in the brothel today was several times more than usual. Although most of them came to listen to the painted skin, they were in a good mood after seeing the song and dance and acrobatics. They didn't receive as much as Grandpa's son, but they were all in the same brothel, so they received some positive effects. If she could receive so much money every day, she would be able to afford the hairpin that she had been yearning for a long time. Next time you want to listen to it, just climb the wall. Lee drank tea while watching the song and dance on the stage. In this kind of occasion and atmosphere, they should be eating melon seeds. Watermelons existed in this world, but he didn't know if they had the habit of eating melon seeds. The girl looked disappointed. Although she didn't like climbing the wall, she had to bear with it for the sake of the new story. After the song and dance ended, and the girls picked up the money on the stage, Lee saw the old storyteller walk onto the stage again. At this moment, the atmosphere in the brothel suddenly became lively. Hurry up. Don't talk nonsense. Tell me about the painted skin. If you try to fool me with next time again, don't blame me for being rude. Even Li Yi's expression was slightly startled when he saw the crowd urging him to hurry up. Was the painted skin so popular in this world? At this moment, the old man raised his hand and pressed down. The voices of the crowd immediately stopped. A few men who were still chatting without knowing what was going on were immediately stopped. The atmosphere in the brothel suddenly became quiet. From noise to silence, it only took a breath or two. Fong was still regretting that the young girl on the stage had been replaced by the old man. He was shocked by the sudden silence and asked subconsciously, "What's wrong?" Shua. Dozens of people turned their heads at the same time. This corner suddenly became the focus of everyone's attention. Under Fong's innocent expression, the old man had already begun to speak. Considering that there were new guests, the old man told the story from the beginning. The guests who had heard it before didn't show any impatience, but the expressions of those who heard it for the first time changed from puzzled to focused, and then to pale. Xiao Huan had already heard of painted skin, although this old grandpa was scarier than the son-in-law when he talked about it. But she had already developed an immunity to it, and would not run far away in fear. This old man is quite good at scaring people, Fong said in a low voice while listening. With his personality, he would not be scared by the old man. If a ghost really dared to scare him like this, he would most likely beat the ghost to death again. Having already memorized the entire story, the old man did not stop when he reached the place where he had left off last time. Instead, he continued. Those who had been fooled by him twice immediately felt relieved. This time, they could finally listen to the next part of the story. They threw a lot of money at him. It was raining copper coins on the stage. The wrinkles on the old man's face bloomed like flowers, and he became more attentive in telling the story. Looking at those people throwing money at him, Li Yi was astonished again. It was just telling a ghost story. How could it earn so much money? It seemed that in the other world, when Pu Songling wrote strange stories from a Chinese studio, he was still poor. But here, a storyteller's story had such an outstanding effect? It seemed that he had only exchanged a few pieces of osmanthus cake with a chapter of painted skin. It was a bit of a loss. He turned to look at the girl named Xiaozhu. He didn't expect her to be so smart at such a young age. Feeling Li Yi's gaze on her, the girl cursed in her heart. After today's scene, if she wanted to hear more stories from him in the future, it would no longer be as simple as stealing a few pieces of osmanthus cake from Sister Ruoqing. The story of Yingning was only half told. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have asked Grandpa's son to tell the story at this time. Looking at his expression, he probably regretted telling the story. Such a story could be sold at a high price in Hua City. Li didn't regret it. The money that the old man got was not even as much as the profit from selling a bottle of Rui nectar. He was just curious about the entertainment in this world. These people watched the programs in the brothel, and when they were happy, they would give tips. These tips were the main source of income for the ordinary actors and storytellers. The tips weren't much, and it was only enough for them to make ends meet. Compared to the stars in the future, who could easily earn tens of millions of yuan by participating in a movie, a TV series, or a commercial performance. These seniors were living a miserable life. In any era, the entertainment industry should be relatively easy to make money. However, the entertainment industry in this world obviously had a lot of room for development. In layman's terms, there was still a lot of room for making money. As the weather gradually entered winter, the mosquitoes were almost frozen to death. Young ladies no longer needed it to drive away mosquitoes. In the cold weather, scholars didn't sleep easily either. The business of Rui nectar gradually cooled down. Sometimes only a few bottles were sold in a day. As for strong alcohol, although it was always in short supply, this thing was too wasteful of food and could not be brewed without restrictions. Most of the people in the Jing country were still hovering around the line of food and clothing and did not even have enough to eat. Even Ning Wangfu could not waste food without scruples. If they were targeted by the imperial censors and imperial censors, even Ning Wang would have a headache. Therefore, a few winemaking workshops had been closed recently. The production of Rui nectar was limited, and the supply of hard liquor was limited. Naturally, the daily income was greatly reduced. Of course, he had saved up a lot during this period of time, so he didn't lack money. However, things like buying a house in the prefecture city could only be postponed. As for the soap and perfume that were only for personal use, it was not suitable to be produced in this season. It was necessary to think of new ways to make money. At this moment, he only had this thought. The most important thing now was to recover from his injuries. He once again focused his attention on the old man. The content of his story was slightly different from what he told the young lady. He had probably made some small changes to cater to the audience. It had to be said that this old man was indeed a professional, even though Li Yi already knew the complete story. Listening to the old man's story still made his hair stand on end. This time, the old man didn't play tricks and honestly finished the story. The audience below the stage applauded. Naturally, there was no lack of rewards. When the old man retreated, it took him a lot of time to clean up the rewards on the ground. Li Yi was purely here to kill time. Xiao Huan and Fang accompanied him. The young lady stayed for a while and left. When Li Yi turned his head, he saw the old man walking over with the young lady following behind him. For today's matter, I still have to thank you, young master. These rewards should belong to young master. The old man placed a small cloth bag on the table and said with a smile, "What do you mean?" Li looked at him puzzled. If it wasn't for the painted skin that young master told me, this old man wouldn't have received so many rewards. This money, please don't refuse, young master. The old man explained. He told the story of the painted skin without prior consent from Li Yi. Although it was exchanged by Xiao Zhu with a few pieces of hanging flower cakes, he could only continue the story with peace of mind if Li Yi accepted the money. Yes, young master, please accept it. The young lady also said. In that case, it would be impolite of me to refuse. Li nodded and took the bag. It was filled with heavy copper coins. Seeing that Li Yi accepted it, the old man relaxed. He hesitated and said, "This old man has a presumptuous request." Chapter 213. An unreasonable request meant an unreasonable request. Since he knew the request was unreasonable, why would he bring it up? However, on account of Xiao Zhu and osmanthus flower cake, Li still smiled and said, "Elder, please speak your mind. It's like this. Young master has also seen that those customers just now all came for painted skin. This old man wants to buy some similar novels from young master. Young master, rest assured, the price will definitely satisfy young master." The old storyteller looked at him and said. Li tilted his head and looked at the young girl standing beside the old man. She must have told this old man these things. When he first told her the story of painted skin, his intention was to tease her more. In the morning in the courtyard, it was because he was really bored and wanted to find someone to talk to. In essence, telling her the story was the same as telling the story to Xiao Huan. But this old man's meaning, just now, was to treat him as the kind of person who specialized in writing scripts, almost equivalent to the scriptwriters of the future. If it was a few months ago, when he was still worrying about his family's lack of food, he might have agreed to this old man. After all, survival was always number one. But now, to sell strange stories from a Chinese studio, for just a few copper coins, even if he didn't say it was unfair to himself, wouldn't it be unfair to Pu Songling? To refuse, he had to be more tactful. He looked at the old man and shook his head, saying, "Haha, this painted skin is something I've heard of by chance. There really aren't any similar stories." The young girl raised her head and looked at him in disbelief. How could there not be any? Where was Legend of the White Snake, Journey to the West, a Chinese ghost story? Could it be that he had made all these up to deceive her? It didn't seem like it. Other than painted skin, there was also the half-finished Ding Ning. The old man's face showed a look of disappointment. He sighed and said, "This old man has disturbed you. If young master has any good stories in the future, this old man will welcome them at any time." He had lived for so long. How could he not know that this young master's words did not match his heart? The girl called Xiaozhu wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything and left with the old man. Fong and Xiaohuan watched the show with relish. Li Yi would occasionally ask Xiaohuan to give him some tips. Even though the show was a little boring for him, it was much better than lying in his room alone. In his heart, he thought that if he had time in the future, he should change the entertainment business here. He had no other purpose but to relieve his boredom. Most of the customers in the brothel had indeed come for the old man's story. After listening to it, many people chose to leave. Li Yi stayed in the brothel for another hour before leaving with Xiaohuan and Fong. When they walked out, a woman walked out from the backstage. When her eyes inadvertently swept over the door, her expression was slightly startled. Sister Ruoqing stopped looking. "They're gone." Xiaozhu stretched out her hand and waved it in front of her eyes, then curled her lips and said, "What happened to him?" Wan Ruoqing muttered to herself as she recalled that when the figure was walking, there was a young girl supporting him. "He's injured," Xiaozhu continued. "In the future when you walk on the road, you must be careful of those vicious dogs that bite people." The girl was still mumbling something, but the pretty face of the woman beside her was a little absent-minded. After a moment, the girl stretched out her hand again and waved it in front of her eyes. "Sister Ruoqing, it's our turn." Walking out of the door of the brothel, and then out of the tile-roofed house, they walked a few steps to reach Rui Lane. When Xiaohuan helped him walk in, Rui and Rui were both in the courtyard. "What is second miss doing?" Fong looked at Lu Rui in the courtyard with some puzzlement, and asked, "Is she practicing martial arts? I've never seen this method before." Seeing this, Li Yi was curious. Previously, Lu Rui said that he was fighting randomly, saying that using softness to overcome hardness, and that there was no martial arts that could move 1,000 caddies with little effort. She advised him to return to the right path as soon as possible, and stop thinking about those unrealistic things all day long. At that time, when he asked her if she wanted to learn from him, Mississippi Lu very bluntly refused. But what was she doing now? Although her mouth said no, her body was still quite honest. Seeing that Li Yi had returned, Rui and Xiaohuan went to the kitchen to cook. Seeing that Li Yi was in no hurry to return to his room, he sat on a chair in the courtyard and looked at her. "Sai, you're not doing this. Experience the feeling of circle. Remember not to use force, relax a little. Only then can you experience the essence of Tai Chi. Come closer, it's too far, I can't see clearly." In the past, it was always Lu Rui who guided him in his practice, and whenever he did something wrong, she would violently correct him. Now that he finally had the chance to be in charge, Li Yi was never tired of correcting her movements. Lu Rui stopped, took a long sword from the side, and pulled it out with a clang. "What are you doing?" Li Yi was shocked. He only corrected a few of her movements. Did she have to pull out the sword? One had to know that at that time, whether it was her words or her movements, they were much more violent than him. Didn't that old Taoist who passed by teach you Tai Chi sword? Lu Rui squinted at him and asked. No, absolutely not. Although there was a Tai Chi sword tutorial in the library, Li Yi shook his head with a face full of certainty. She didn't want to learn Tai Chi sword. She obviously wanted to find a chance to torture him to vent her anger. Lu Rui glanced at her and put away her sword. Fong ran out of the shop, glanced at Lu Rui, and ran to Li Yi's side and whispered, "Young master, Miss Wan is here." "Miss Wan?" Lu Rui's heart moved, and he immediately looked over. Looking at Fong's guilty look, Li Yi felt depressed. If Miss Wan was here, then so be it. Why did he have to be so quiet? The two of them had a pure relationship, and they didn't have any secret relationship. So why were they afraid of being seen by others? Hearing the footsteps behind him, Lu Rui looked back, and the moment he met the woman's eyes, a trace of amazement flashed through their eyes. "Greetings, madam." Wan Ruoqing walked to Lu Rui's side, smiled and bowed slightly. Although Li Yi had never put on airs in front of her, he was a county lieutenant after all, and his status was much higher than that of a lowly woman like her. She subconsciously regarded the woman in the yard as her wife, and bowed slightly. "Madam?" The expression on Li Yi's face was slightly stunned, and Lu Rui was stunned for a moment. She understood what Li Yi meant, and a trace of red appeared on her pretty face, and she glared at Li Yi fiercely. Li Yi was depressed by her glare, and he couldn't blame himself for this. Mississippi Lu was too unreasonable. Thinking that she had never been reasonable, he sighed, stood up, and said, "Miss Ruoqing, you have mistaken me for someone else. This is actually my wife's sister." "Ah, sorry." Wan Ruoqing was stunned for a moment, and then an awkward expression appeared on her face, and she hurriedly apologized. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Miss Ruoqing, what can I do for you?" The embarrassment on Wan Ruoqing's face had not faded. She paused and said, "You said that you were injured. I came to have a look. It's just a small injury. It's not a big deal." Li Yi said with a smile, "It's good that you're fine. I'll go first." What happened just now made her blush. Seeing that Li Yi was fine, she was also relieved. She hurriedly put down the bamboo basket in her hand. "There's nothing good. These osmanthus cakes, just take it as a small gift from Ruoqing." "Ah." Li Yi still wanted to say something, but after she put down the basket, she hurriedly turned around and left, and no matter how he called her, she would not look back. "I haven't brought the basket back yet." Watching her figure disappear from his sight, Li Yi murmured in a low voice. Lu Rui walked out of the kitchen and looked outside the door in confusion. She walked to him and asked, "Husband, where's that girl? Maybe there's something urgent." "I'll go first." Li Yi spread out his hands helplessly. Lu Rui nodded and did not dwell on this matter anymore. She looked at him and said, "Husband, come in with me." Li Yi thought that she had something to discuss with him, so he followed her into the room. Lu Rui waited for him to come in, and then closed the door. Seeing her action, Li Yi was puzzled. It seemed that the thing to be discussed later was very important. "Husband, take off your clothes first." After Li Yi sat on the bed, his soft voice came to his ears. "Ah." Li Yi looked up at Lu Rui, who was walking towards him, and doubted his ears. Chapter 214. Take off my clothes? Li Yi was stunned and his mind went blank for a moment. Didn't they have something important to discuss? Was it necessary to take off his clothes to discuss something? A man and a woman were alone in a room. A woman closed the door and asked another man to take off his clothes. Anyone would think of something indescribable. This is not good. It was broad daylight and Rui and Xiaohuan were still outside. Couldn't they do it at night? Moreover, with Rui's character, how could she take the initiative? This surprised Li Yi and made him a little happy. Was his virginity of 2 lifetimes going to end today? "If you don't take off your clothes, how can I heal you?" Lu Rui looked at him and explained. "That palm hurt your lungs, and it's not easy to heal. Using true qi to help you clear your meridians can help you recover faster." "I see." Li Yi looked a little disappointed. It turned out that it was just healing. He struggled for so long just now. If she asked for that, should he obey or obey or obey? He had no choice but to obey. She was so good at martial arts and he was injured. He couldn't resist. He could only resist symbolically, and then reluctantly. In the end, he was just thinking too much. He did not know that Junqi could also heal injuries. It was no wonder that the experts in wuxia novels would feel like they were on the brink of death when they were slashed a few times or struck a few palms. It was as if they would die in the next moment, but they would immediately recover after a few days. It turned out that Junshi could heal themselves, and the effect was thousands of times better than seeing a doctor or taking medicine. This was simply a life-saving bug that defied the natural order. The chances of becoming a martial arts master were already very slim. At the very least, he had to cultivate true qi. He did not ask for anything else. With the healing skills of a priest, his ability to protect himself immediately increased by a lot. Healing wounds was fine. Li Yi began to take off his clothes slowly. He wore a little more winter clothes, and only had a thin shirt on his upper body. When he reached out to untie his belt, Lu Rui's voice came. "Husband." Li Yi looked up at her. "You don't need to take off your clothes." It was not like what was depicted in the TV series, where the two of them sat cross-legged on the bed, one in front of the other, naked, with the latter's hands pressed tightly against the former's back. Hot air rose from their bodies, and red and blue lights flickered alternately. At this moment, the scene in the room was much gentler. Li Yi closed his eyes and lay flat on the bed. He lifted his clothes and revealed the place where he had been hit by Wu Ying's palm. Compared to yesterday, the bruise had already faded a little. Rui's slender and fair palm covered his abdomen. Other than feeling that her hand was abnormally warm, Li Yi did not feel anything else. There was no such thing as a warm current. The television was full of lies. If he had to say what he felt, it would be comfortable, especially when the hand on his abdomen moved slowly. Li Yi opened his eyes and happened to meet her gaze. Time seemed to stop for a moment. Rui's hand paused slightly, and an invisible layer of charming atmosphere spread out. "Cough, I'm a little thirsty." Li Yi coughed dryly, making the atmosphere slightly less awkward. "I'll go get some water." Lu Rui breathed a sigh of relief and quickly walked away. She opened the door and walked out. Looking at her slightly flustered footsteps, Li Yi's heart surged with an indescribable feeling. In his previous life, he had been single for 20 years. Before he transmigrated, he was still worried about his mother forcing him to get married. In the end, in less than 2 days, he got married to someone and had a wife. To be honest, when he was pressured by his mother, it was not that he had never thought of finding someone to marry and spend the rest of his life with. In his previous life, Li Yi was not considered a successful person, but he was not that bad either. The girl he had a crush on for a while got married and had children early. After he passed the age of 20, he did not feel that he had to marry anyone else in this life. He was satisfied as long as he could find someone and live a stable life. If he did not meet that psychopath Wu Ying, his current life was actually considered stable. He had a wife who could satisfy all men's fantasies, a sister-in-law who was unruly and willful, but would not drop the ball at a critical moment, a silly and cute maid who did not have any ideals and liked to listen to stories, and he was surrounded by beauties. He lived an ancient life that many men dreamed of envied. The only strange thing was his relationship with Rui. They were husband and wife in name, but after spending time together, although the distance between them was constantly narrowing, they had never exceeded the state of friendship and love. In any case, compared to other people, his feelings for Rui were the most special. It was impossible to say that he loved her to death, but when he thought of the person who would accompany him for the rest of his life, the first person that appeared in his mind was still her figure. However, at least until now, the relationship between the two had not reached the point where they could do something more intimate. The revolution had not succeeded, and the comrades still had to work hard. He did not know if it was an illusion, but when Li Yi looked down, he found that the bruise on his abdomen was lighter, and the faint pain had lessened. It should be the effect of Rui's touch that woke him up. "Son-in-law, it's time to eat." Not long after he put on his clothes, Xiao Huan knocked on the door and came in. In the next few days, Rui would use her true qi to help him sort out his meridians. She seemed to have gotten used to it, and did not stop like the first time. Of course, Li Yi was a normal man after all. Sometimes he could not control some of his body's normal reactions when she touched his lower abdomen. Every time this happened, the atmosphere would become awkward again. It was unknown what had happened to Rui recently, but the number of times she practiced martial arts was much more than before. Sometimes, she would come over and ask Li Yi some questions about Tai Chi. Li Yi could only make it look like Tai Chi. How could he know anything deeper? He just casually threw out the words written in the book that sounded powerful, and it was enough for her to ponder over it for a whole day. As usual, he would go to the brothel to kill time. The old man would recite the painted skin over and over again, and anyone would get tired of it. The number of customers he could attract was decreasing, which was a good thing for Li Yi. It was quieter with fewer people. Every day, after lunch, he would order a cup of tea and sit there for about 2 hours. During this period, the old man gave him money several times and mentioned that he wanted to buy some stories from Li Yi. After he did not get the answers he wanted, he did not speak again. If it was a coincidence, he could occasionally see Ruoqing singing on stage. Sometimes, after she finished singing, she would come over and say a few words to Li Yi. She would take out her poems and let him comment on them. Li Yi had almost digested all the books about poetry in the library. It might be difficult for him to write a good poem, but he had accumulated a lot of knowledge and could give good suggestions most of the time. The girl named Xiao Zhu stood behind Ruoqing and looked at them. Sometimes she would look at them from head to toe, and her eyes would roll around. She looked like a mischievous spirit. She did not understand poetry, and she had never heard of Li Yi's name. She just felt that Sister Ruoqing's friend seemed to be a genius who knew a lot of stories. He was good at everything, but he was too stingy. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.